Chapter 26. Offer. Published by Web Novel. Discordant note. TBATE. Torrin Dane was weak, crushed under the oppressive boot of the Vreetra's strength-based society. But after the desperate last gamble of a failing deity imbues him with more knowledge than he ever dreamed of, he is forced to enter a proxy war between the Surin clans that has lasted for untold generations. Armed with knowledge of the future and the potential to change it, Torrin will have to face high bloods, corrupt churches, dangerous beasts, and power-hungry Asura to get what he needs. If he wishes to survive, he will have to alter the future in a way that will keep him and those he cares for safe from the approaching tide of war and death, all while hiding a burning secret in his core from the very leaders of the continent he lives on. For Alakria, and by extension, Torrin himself is a mere piece in a larger game between the gods. And when deities play chess with the lives of mortals as pawns, only bloodshed follows. Semi-SI into Alakria. Updates daily. Cover art commissioned by @Afra_. Torrin Dane. I shifted into a more stable stance, but resheathed my dagger. And what makes you think I need the help of a group of wealthy investors? I asked, using the young rat's amusing rationalization for thievery. From where I stand, we have nothing to do with each other. The rat shook his head. That conical mask had no right to look so good on a person. You're forgetting something, Dusk. We do have something you need. In fact, I think you need it very much. And what would that be? Information, he responded, a glimmer in his eye. The most valuable of currencies. Everybody needs it, and nobody has enough. And you, my young Dane, are in most dire need of it. I finally pinpointed why the rat felt so wrong to me. I couldn't sense him at all. Sure, I could see the man and he made noise, allowing me to negotiate. But the ever so slight tingling sensation of being watched, of having a person's attention on you, the constant weight in the ambient mana that indicated a mage stood there, unconsciously pressing onto the ambient mana with their intent. That just didn't exist for the man. I could sense the subtle gaze of the young rat, and even the older axe wielder. But not their leader. His relaxed stare irritated me. I felt my brow twitch under my mask, his casual utterance of my true identity reminding me of my situation. It was a subtle barb that proved his point remarkably well. He had information about me and about my circumstances. He used that to highlight the fact that I had none. I narrowed my eyes, then sat down in a nearby pew. The wood creaked under my weight, but it thankfully held. I nonchalantly slung an arm over the back, relaxing my posture. Internally, I ramped the mana from my core. I would be ready to move at a moment's notice. It is a universal truth that everybody wants to know something about somebody else, I said casually. But one must always be careful of the source. After all, every informant has their own goals and aspirations. I looked across the trio. I admit my ignorance in regards to many things, but there are a dozen different ways to alleviate that ignorance. I centered my attention back on the rat. Yes, I need information. But what makes you think I should bargain with you? My answer seemed to please the rat. He nodded, taking my reply in stride. Well, as reinvestors in the economy, we tend to hear very interesting things through the underground. We keep an eye on our customers, after all. And one interesting thing was the recent announcement from Bloodjohn themselves, sent to all their internal forces and allies. The rat's mask of good cheer fell and he regarded me with utter seriousness. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. You've got a kill on sight order, Torrin Dane, from half the bloods in Fiatra. What did you say? I asked in shock, leaning forward. The rat leaned against the altar. Pardon my impropriety, but you kicked a hornet's nest by interrupting that acid beam nest expedition. Bloodjohn has some weighty connections, and they pulled in a lot of favors in the past couple of hours setting a watch across the city for your hide, the thief said. Something that would have been amazing to know at the time, I'd think. A benefit of information. I blinked incredulously, entirely thrown by the event, but I helped save what was left of that expedition. I said, baffled, why the hell would they want me dead even more? I added, my composure broken by the news. If what the rat said was true, it had dangerous implications. They don't particularly care, my friend-to-be, the rat replied, a bit of his previous guile returning to his face. Luckily for you, you've just so managed to be in the least regulated district of Fiatra for the last afternoon, entirely away from the majority of bloods keeping an eye out for you. Isn't that a happy coincidence? He gave me a winning smile. I couldn't see it under his bandana, but I swear I could feel it. I wanted to punch his smug teeth in, but I owed him one for that. If what he was telling me was correct, I likely escaped encirclement by immediately following his letter. This isn't going the way I thought it would, I said at last, slumping in my seat. The need to maintain a mask and put on airs in my meeting with the rats felt wholly insignificant in the face of a manhunt looking for me. My patience for posturing vanished like mist dispersed by the wind. The rat shrugged. These things rarely do, he said jovially, but there's a bright side to all this, I promise. I pushed past thinking of a dozen countermeasures and the dreaded possibility of vanishing into the Clearwood forest again. I am struggling to see anything good about this. I think you'll bite once we show you what we know, he said. Here's a nugget of info for free. The woman you want is named Kaelin Joan, sister of Laurent Joan, the patriarch of the family. She's a conniving witch who rarely leaves the protection of their territory. We can get you clothes and give you an opportunity to fulfill that mission of yours. The stick, then the carrot. What's the catch? I asked. If there was one thing that was a constant between worlds, it was that everything was done for a reason. What did the rats have to gain from me fulfilling my revenge? Have you ever considered switching out that mask? The rat asked instead. He ran a hand over his own mask. Ah, a recruitment offer. I furrowed my brow. I had somewhat expected this. I mulled over my next words carefully. First of all, why me? I said, genuinely wanting to know the answer. I thought I had gathered a vague impression of this group, but I didn't see where I might fit in. What do I have to offer that you want? You're fast and quiet, the rat said. What better talents for a wealth redistributor? And besides, you're not the only one who has a grudge against the Jones. Our merry little band has only failed a heist once, and we aim to fix that. Plus, you'd be surprised how few mages apply for membership here. I could sense the truth in his words, but there was more to it than that. Something gnawed at me about that. It was ironic. I had arrived here hours in advance to scout for traps, but I didn't even realize I was already penned in before answering the call. If I declined the offer to join this crew, I was left to my own devices to fend off the advances of Bloodjohn and the other houses. I wasn't sure it was even true, but would he lie to me with something so easy to verify? If a man was telling the truth, I would be left to shelter myself again, back to square one. But if I joined these wealth redistributors, I would have the protection of an experienced group. They had some sort of information network, considering the information the young rat gave me. I wouldn't be flailing blindly in the dark. My actions would have more direction and a stable foundation of planning. Furthermore, I wouldn't be alone. The last point burned in my mind the most, despite its relative insignificance. I didn't want to admit it, but I was terribly lonely in this new world. My unique circumstances made me one of 3 reincarnates on this entire planet, and I doubted Nico and Arthur would be able to relate to me over the intricacies of my previous life. I was a unique kind of isolated, and it burned me with every day I spent alone. I craved human interaction, but I wasn't willing to break my principles for this. I won't help you steal from people who can't support themselves, I said, remembering the rundown nature of these slums. If you steal from common people, I'm out. The rat shook his head. We aren't savages, Torrin. Our targets are all people who won't miss the coins we take. A mark here, a crest there, and they can't even spot the difference amidst their stores of wealth. So they stole from the rich alone? My one meeting with the young rat seemed to confirm this, as they were caught leaving the Jones estate. I mulled it over a bit more, considering my options. If I agreed to this, I said slowly, clasping my hands together as my elbows rested on my knees, I want a guarantee of information that I can use, as well as the right to leave after the job with the Jones is done. I couldn't let myself be locked in with these people, either. Once I was finished with my revenge, I would need to turn my attention to Scythe Nico. I couldn't be chained to one place. The rat looked me over. We'll have to work out the finer details a bit later, he said. In the meantime, welcome to the company of the rat, he said with another flourish. He withdrew a mask from his dimension rune, tossing it across the room. I caught it, inspecting the artifact. I could sense slight waves of mana from it. I'm certain you'll have a blast. It turned out that the mask was enchanted in some way. It would stick to my face without the need for straps, according to the rat. I sat in the same pew, turning the mask over in my hands. It was stark gray, with an exaggerated snout and painted whiskers. It barely covered more skin than a domino mask, but these people had a theme. The rat had left a few minutes ago, claiming to need to get a few things in order before taking me to their hideout. The young rat and the axe wielder stayed behind, awkwardly looking anywhere but toward me. My view darkened as the unseen world overtook my vision. Lady Dawn stood in the center of the aisle, her gaze intent on the basilisk mosaic at the end of the room. She was invisible to everyone but me. You were impulsive, contractor, she said at last. I spared her a side-eye glance. The words were harsh, but rarely did Lady Dawn offer criticism emptily. I learned that in my training very quickly. How so? I asked quietly, genuinely wondering how. I wouldn't call myself impulsive, but I also wasn't sure how much of me was still me after my merge with Torin. I used to have a good idea of who I was. In agreeing to join these thieves, she said, you know nothing about them, while they know much of you. You do not know if they can be trusted, or if their words are genuine. You agreed on the spur of the moment, without giving the offer time for consideration. She tilted her head. You do not know if they are even thieves. You're right, I said, looking over the runes on the inner side of the mask. But it didn't take much for me to realize I didn't have a choice. I've been running around blind, striking at shadows, hoping each would pull me closer to my vengeance. But only now have I learned that horrid woman's name. The rat mask wouldn't hide my eyes very well. My current mask cast my face in a shadow, shielding that part of me from observation. The fact that I know so little proves my need to learn more. I need to take some risks here. Truth be told, I had been very impulsive. Thinking it over, I suspected it was something I'd gotten from Torin. First I tried to bargain with Lady Dawn, then I rushed headlong into a dangerous forest with barely more than the clothes on my back. After that, I tried to spy on a noble family with no espionage experience. And finally, I attempted to interfere in that expedition. All were textbook impulsive. But I finally had an opportunity for some concrete direction. I knew that Kaelin Joan was the woman who killed my brother. I had suspected it from reading the book on Blood Joan, but this was surefire confirmation. It lined up. I finally made progress. Lady Dawn turned away from the mosaic, staring at me with her burning coals. I didn't sense judgment from those eyes, at least not in the conventional sense. Perhaps this rogue did tell you the truth, but the rat could be running to alert your enemies himself as we speak, guiding them here to you. You would be trapped like a rat in a pen, dependent on their mercy. I considered that for a moment. No, I don't think he is, I said with surprising surety. If there was something I trusted about myself, it was my ability to read people. And while the rat held an irritating level of confidence, he didn't strike me as two-faced. That was quite ironic, considering he was a thief who hid behind a mask. But I trusted my instincts around people. He has reasons for recruiting me beyond my skills, I said, thinking back to our conversation. But in the end, it doesn't matter. The rat was right. I need information and I need backing. I can't go this alone. I was surprised to feel Lady Dawn's hand brush my shoulder. It was gone in an instant, but I turned to the side. She was staring into the piercing scarlet eyes of the Vritra mosaic once again. You are not alone in this, contractor. My next words caught in my throat, but my train of thought was interrupted by the young rat striding over. The unseen vanished, taking Lady Dawn with it. So, it sounds like you managed to be a complication for the Jones after all, she said conversationally. She looked at the pew but wisely decided to keep standing. I wasn't sure it could hold both of our weights. I took a deep breath, pushing down my reservations. I stood up, stretching to work out the aches in my back. I think I ended up looking a lot more like a complication than I actually was, I said with mirthful amusement. I ignored the images of men dying under my watch that pulsed under the surface. The truth was that more would have died if I hadn't helped at all, and I needed to grind that into my skull. I'd believe it eventually if I kept repeating that. Oh, the young rat said, amused. It sounds like they're blaming you for the failure of the entire thing, from what we've heard. Some little shield scampered back, claiming that right after you popped up, they got swamped by hundreds of hornets. Apparently, you drew another nest to the expedition. I blinked. Mira, that bitch. I am going to dump that woman back into the Clearwood Forest, I decided. Yeah, that'd be a fitting punishment. See how she likes fighting her way out. The young rat side-eyed me. Have you ever actually stolen anything before? She asked lightly. I remembered one time when I was a child, stealing a candy bar from a grocery store. My parents had marched me right back to apologize to the minimum wage employee at the customer service desk. I suddenly felt a lot more unsure about being a thief, especially because I never considered actually taking things from people. Yeah, maybe a bit impulsive, I agreed with Lady Dawn. Well, I once stole a bit of food before I got my magic, I said honestly. I frowned. Got caught, though. I'm not surprised, the young rat said. I think I would have felt good when somebody told me I didn't look like I'd make a good thief, but somehow this young woman said it like it was a character flaw. Should I be insulted or flattered? You don't have the hands for it. Hands how? I asked, confused. My hands were covered. They don't twitch whenever you see something expensive, she said, as if that explained everything. All those goons you clocked back in North Fiatra, and not once did you look at their jewels. Then she did something that honestly surprised me. She took off her mask. The woman had an attractive face, with inquisitive eyes and thin features. I'm called Nareni outside work, she said, offering me a hand to shake. It looks like you've been recruited. I looked at the offered hand. The fact that the young rat Nareni had revealed her face to me cemented my guess that the rat wasn't rushing off to turn me in. But then I also noticed an ever so subtle twitch of her hand, her eyes laying intently on my dimension ring. I was not going to shake with the hand that was wearing my ring. I took off my own mask, unfastening the clasps that wrapped around my head. I pulled it into my dimension rune, then offered my non-ring hand. Torin, I said, though you already knew that. Nareni seemed to pout when I offered the wrong hand, forcing her to change which hand she proffered before we shook. You learn fast, at least, she said sullenly. The axe wielder finally approached, his build noticeably bigger than either I or Nareni's. I'm sorry on the rat's behalf, the man said. I shook his hand as well, unsurprised by his sturdy grip. This man's eyes didn't wander to the jewelry I wore. He can be grating at times, but don't let him hear you say that. I'm called Hoffel, by the way. Under the mask, Hoffel had thinning dark hair and rugged sideburns down the side of his face that weren't so easy to see with a cloak obscuring them. He lit another cigar as he continued. If you want to get back at the man, call him Carcian when he returns. He puffed the smoke to the side. He enjoys these skits too much. The rafters of this building are too old for him to be jumping around them anymore, and he could have actually damaged the structure. Good architecture, this. I raised a brow, a lot of my tension easing at last. Does he do this often? I said, gesturing to the altar. It was an obvious bit of showmanship in retrospect, one that didn't fail to impress. I think that basilisk was judging him worse than I ever could, I said with amusement, referencing the towering mosaic behind the altar. It felt so good to talk to people again. I personally think the sovereigns encourage him, Nareni said, crossing her arms. I don't know how else he could pull off the stunts he does without some sort of divine assistance. Stunts, a voice said from directly behind Nareni. I jumped with a curse, getting ready to draw my dagger once more. Hoffel groaned, but Nareni squeaked, whirling on her foot to face who had spoken. The rat stood there, shaking his head. He was still wrapped in mist. I'm wounded, my dear protégé. I think you're giving me a bad reputation with the new recruit. I frowned, irritated that he had snuck up on me. Again, I think the rat is a lot more accurate than Carcian, I said, voicing my thoughts. It fits you better. Hoffel puffed out a ring of smoke. He's got a point, Car. The rat Carcian rolled his eyes. You'll never appreciate my genius. He waved a hand dismissively. No matter. Well, we're going to our little rat's den, and it would be in your best interest to join us, my friend, he said, gesturing to me. The man hadn't unmasked yet. A bit of unease pressed from my gut. And why is that? Because you managed to be spotted on the way over here, that's why. And it would be poor form to lose a new hire so soon after the interview. I was beginning to realize that this man would drive me insane. Chapter 27, Base of Operations. Published by Web Novel. Discordant note, TBATE. Torin Dane was weak, crushed under the oppressive boot of the Vritra's strength-based society. But after the desperate last gamble of a failing deity imbues him with more knowledge than he ever dreamed of, he is forced to enter a proxy war between the Surin clans that has lasted for untold generations. Armed with knowledge of the future and the potential to change it, Torin will have to face high bloods, corrupt churches, dangerous beasts, and power-hungry Asura to get what he needs. If he wishes to survive, he will have to alter the future in a way that will keep him and those he cares for safe from the approaching tide of war and death, all while hiding a burning secret in his core from the very leaders of the continent he lives on. For Alakria, and by extension, Torin himself is a mere piece in a larger game between the gods. And when deities play chess with the lives of mortals as pawns, only bloodshed follows. Semi-SI into Alakria. Updates daily. Cover art commissioned by @Afra_. Torin Dane. I watched a few mages covertly observing the buildings near the old temple from my hiding space. They were certainly on the lookout for somebody, and considering their location, it was easy to guess who. How did they follow me? I said with a whisper, peering through the small gap in the bricks. I was in the entrance to some sort of secret tunnel, guided by the rats once I was alerted to my conundrum. The mages were keeping an eye on the location I was at before entering the old temple for my meeting. Scratch that, how did I not notice them? Even if I couldn't tell when the rat was a foot behind me, I was still proud of the senses I had honed in the Clearwood Forest. That these people supposedly trailed me for so long was a blow to that pride. I was behind a brick wall that moved after Nareni had stepped on some sort of pressure plate, allowing it to swing inward and allow us through. A small summon will-o-wisp hovered around my head, providing a bit of light for me in the darkness. Carcian leaned against a nearby wall, flanked by Hoffel and Nareni. The Bloods have informants all over the city, he said. Considering it took them nearly an hour to track you here is a testament to how weak those nets are in East Piatra. And they weren't trailing you directly, merely following clues left behind. I wonder how much luck you have left after this. He pushed off the wall, moving down the passage. At the end was a circular trapdoor that opened with a simple kick. Extinguish that fire for me, will you? I looked at my little speck of fire. Is there light down there? I asked, peeking over the edge of the trapdoor. The entrance rang like something hellish. Damn, I said, backing away. What's that smell? It was like a mix of rotten eggs, feces, and a dozen other things I would rather not guess at. Nareni snickered at my gagging, then dropped down the chute without a second thought. I thought I caught a note of pity in Hoffel's face as he followed after. That's Fiakra's sewer system. Fun fact about sewage, Torin Dane. Sewer gas is mostly composed of methane. I looked over at my little ball of light. Noted, I said, extinguishing the fire. I didn't need a gas explosion down there. You coming? Carcian asked. Yeah, I said, resignation in my bones. I had tried so hard to keep myself clean. I dropped down into the sewers. The stench could be weathered. I could block it out eventually after getting used to it, and my sense of smell was pretty weak anyways. The rotten eggs and feces could slowly drift to the back of my perception. The sensation of wading through the muck, however, would stick with me till the day I died. It was viscous and sloppy, resisting my movement with each step. The flow of sewage barely came up past my ankles, but the mud-like consistency gripped my boots with malicious greed. Never swam in filth, Torin? Nareni asked from ahead. She was enjoying this far too much. I opened my mouth to respond, then gagged on the taste. Oh god, I was going to brush my teeth for an hour after this. The young rat cackled, while Carcian snorted. Hoffel patted me on my back good-natured DLY. You'll get used to it eventually, he said. I like to think about the history of this place. Did you know that these tunnels were first constructed over 200 years ago? They haven't had regular maintenance in nearly a century, but they still function without much oversight. A wonder of architecture. I had a hard time appreciating the big shield's words. Did I want to get used to this? I felt something push around my feet. I shuddered in place. I think something just brushed past my leg, I said. No, I was not whining. Probably a musk crab, Nareni said, noting my nerves. The entire group trudged on with surety, taking branching paths and turns with confidence. They clearly knew where they were going. They're these tiny little crustacean monobeasts that feed on the sewer gas and leave behind cleaner air. Pretty harmless. Christ, things lived in this muck. I thought back to my escapades in the Clearwood Forest and the waves of quivering chitin that had surrounded the expedition. Anything with more than 4 legs, I decided for the second time, did not deserve to live. Even if they contributed to zero greenhouse gases. Nareni snickered again as I shuddered. You're not the only one to hate the sewers, Hoffel said, peeking around the corner. Nareni tormented one of our other members a while back, too. He eventually adapted. Now she needs another person to mess with. Other member? I said, fighting past the urge to gag at the taste. I thought you 3 were all there was, I finished. We have a couple more members of our band, Carcian said. We all have our roles here. What you see here are our combat forces. I followed the rats as they made another turn. You're awfully honest about your operations with me, I said slowly. I don't see why you're trusting me with this information. Carcian peeked over his shoulder. Who says I'm being honest with you, Torin? In fact, I could be leading you into a dastardly trap, set to sell you off the Jones themselves. Seeing how I wasn't reacting to that non-explanation, Hoffel interrupted. Well, the truth is, Torin, that we know a lot more about you than you think. Considering what we know about you and who told us, it's enough to warrant a measure of trust. Slightly disconcerted by Hoffel's frankness, I was about to ask what he knew when the group paused. The leader of the rats tapped in several places in the dark walls of the tunnel. The bricks folded away as if by magic, allowing a stream of light to stream out of the opening. And we're home, he said, walking into the light. I followed, but a hand held me back. I blinked, adjusting to the glare. Hoffel held up some sort of artifact, offering it to me. I took it, confused as to its purpose. It blows very, very cold air, he said. Use it on your boots. It helps get rid of the gunk on your feet from traipsing around the sewers. You don't want to track that all over your new home. The tiles aren't treated to withstand the residue, and they'll corrode. I nodded thankfully, using the artifact on my boots. I supplied it with a steady flow of mana, the little device lighting up as it activated. It looked like a blow dryer, but the air that pushed out of it was far below freezing. As the cold iced over my shoes, the sludge that was coating my boots shriveled and froze, then cracked and chipped off the leather. Not even a stain was left behind. Hoffel took the artifact back from my thankful hands, using it on his own feet. I surveyed where the rats had led me. It was a wide space, but the similar architecture to the outside sewers told me it wasn't carved separately. Lighting artifacts hung on the side of thick stone support pillars, giving the place a low light that allowed me to see with ease. The floor was surprisingly free of water, except for small patches near the entrance. At the center of the room, a tall opening let in bits of natural light, the rays creating a warmer feel than I'd expected. I noticed a few interesting sights almost immediately. A few wood training dummies on one end of the room hinted at a training area, while a large map of Fiatra against one wall with a large table and several chairs might have been a meeting ground. Welcome to our glorious abode, Carcian said, sweeping his arm to display the room. Here we plan the downfall of the wealthy and consort with demons, though not necessarily in that order. I took off my metal mask, storing it in my dimension ring at last. My hair was slick with sweat from the humid sewers, but this little hideout was a bit chilly. It's nicer than I expected, I said, considering I waded through a mile of sewage to get here. Carcian shrugged. For now, make yourself comfortable. Explore, find your rooms, steal a coin or two. This is the safest place for you until the manhunts calm down. We call it the cistern, as that's what it used to be before we requisitioned it for more noble purposes. The leader of the rats nodded toward his protege. Mind settling him in? He asked. Nareni nodded. Got it, Car. She waved at me to follow her, then broke off toward an archway that led out of sight. With a moment of hesitation, I followed after her. She led me into an adjacent chamber. Several doors were fitted along the wall, and these looked decidedly out of place compared to the rest of the architecture. Nareni opened one, allowing me a peek inside. There was a simple pallet bed, a desk, and a chest of drawers. There was a light fixture on the wall that illuminated the room. It had a homier feel than I would have thought from an underground hideout. The young rat pointed at the bed. That one's yours. Few rules around here. First, don't be a dick, she said bluntly. Treat others with respect. Don't steal from each other if you'll get caught doing so, and don't bring anyone unapproved into the cistern. Also, if Hoffel tries to tell you the history of the stonework here, ignore him. I raised a brow. I thought there was no honor among thieves, I said, taking off my cloak. Instead of setting it on my new end table, I wheeled it into my dimension ring. Nareni rolled her eyes. Considering we only steal from well-to-do bastards like those Jones you hate so much, I'd say we're more principled than half the people in the city. I hummed, then lay down on the bed. It was certainly nicer than the rooftop I'd lived on for the past few days. The pretty's that way, along with the shower and bath. There's only one shower, and I get dibs first thing in the morning, she said, gesturing toward another entryway. That another rule? It comes before all the others, Nareni said. I'm second in command here, so I can make that a rule. After a few more instructions on what I could do apparently, I should be careful taking out the brick of the wall to make secret compartments, as the structure was old and might not take that well. Nareni left to do other things. I was left alone on my new bed, contemplating this changing situation. On a whim, I retrieved my notebook from my dimension ring. The journal was one of the few items I owned that had the sigil of named Blooddane stamped on it, but the information it held contained information more dangerous than anything I owned. I hadn't managed to write an entry in the past few days since tracking the expedition, so I took the chance to do so now. My pen wrote in what would be a gibberish mishmash of letters and symbols to unsuspecting eyes. In fact, it was a cipher designed to ward away prying eyes. This journal held all the information I could remember of the beginning after the end, and it was time to add another entry. Company of the Rat, small-time thieving gang acting against blood centered in Fiatra. At least 5 members, motivated by greed, preservation, or something else, offered me help and information, implied to have significant knowledge of Torin. Trustworthy? After a moment, I underlined trustworthy. It would be important to learn what drove this group. Carcian stated I could leave when my vengeance was done, but that was only verbal assurance. I was locked into this path right now, but gathering information was key. I continued to jot down miscellaneous observations and key details of the past couple of days. And who might that be for? A voice said from beside me. My fist whipped out before I was even aware, a shroud of vibrating sound wrapping my strike. It missed the target. Carcian leisurely sidestepped my strike, his coat of mist rippling slightly as my attack slid past. Damn it, I said, exhaling a breath. I snapped my notebook shut, glaring at the man. Could you just not? I asked, exasperation clear in my voice. Carcian hadn't taken off his mask, but his bandana was lowered. I now knew he was smirking at me. Detailing our devious operations already, Torin? I didn't take you for a spy, he said, eyeing my notebook. I clutched it tighter unconsciously. A flicker of worry that he could understand the words on my pages surfaced in my mind, but a quick thought quelled that. The code I used to scramble text was significant and complicated. It wouldn't be easy to decipher my writing, especially not from a glance. His guess was accurate not because he could read what I wrote, but because it was logical. I banished the notebook to my dimension ring. I don't appreciate being spied on, Carcian, I said. Then after a beat, you've been trusting of me, but I still don't know you or your motives. I reserve a right to some privacy. Carcian tilted his head. Is it spying if I simply wait in plain sight? Yes. Oh, well, I was going to offer a way to alleviate those concerns of yours, though. He nodded toward the main area of the cistern. Come on, Torin. I sighed, then pulled myself off the bed. Carcian led me to the small area with wooden practice dummies. On closer inspection, I could see a clearly delineated area between the support beams, about 50 feet in diameter. Nareni was stretching in the middle, going through some clear combat warm-ups. I stepped in, surveying the area. The floor here was smoother than the bricks elsewhere in the cistern. So you'll be my sparring partner, then? Nareni asked, pulling on her foot to stretch out her leg. I looked to Carcian, who stood on the edge. It seems that way, I said, though I don't understand why. Carcian filled me in, thankfully. You'll be helping us liberate trapped assets soon, Torin, but we don't know how you fight. Getting a feel for your style would do wonders in forming teamwork. I frowned, but stepped into the ring. Was how I fight not one of the many things you supposedly know about me? I said. Carcian shrugged. Practical experience always trumps second-hand knowledge, so they probably didn't know everything I could do. Good to know. Anyway, standard point sparring rules. No maiming, no fatal spells, stay inside the ring, and try to have fun. I blinked, wanting to ask some questions, but never got the chance. Nareni rushed me the moment Carcian finished his sentence. She lashed out with a speedy left hook. I ducked the strike hastily, but a knee coated in ice nearly clipped my chin. I used a push of telekinesis to help myself dodge, the flare of white mingling with the frosty blue of my opponent's knee. How come you get to stretch? I snapped. Nareni simply grinned in response. I unsheathed my dagger deftly, using it to deflect a few thin slivers of ice Nareni had thrown in my retreat. I retaliated by conjuring a dozen small fireballs in the air, then willing them to hurtle toward the thief by trade. They whistled toward my foe, casting odd shadows as they moved. Nareni dodged a few, which impacted the floor with a small scorch mark. Too slow, Torin, she called in a sing-song voice. Maybe if you trained for another 100 years, you'd hit the mark. My fireballs were intentionally weakened, but would still singe if they hit. The young mage conjured a small buckler of solid ice over her forearm, using the wide surface area to deflect the fireballs she couldn't dodge. I rushed forward, telekinetic pushes helping me close the distance far faster than otherwise. Nareni spotted me coming, her eyes widening in shock. She threw a handful of icy caltrops into my path, causing me to stumble to avoid spearing my feet. With my advance disrupted, Nareni conjured a particularly long staff of ice. She used it to vault over the spiky ice constructs, aiming an ice-covered roundhouse kick at me as she flew. She used the anchor it provided to add extra leverage to her attack. You're open, she cried, spinning with force. The leg flashed in my peripheral vision, a promise of at least a minor concussion if it landed. A dozen different options zipped through my mind, but I settled on one rapidly. I was still off balance from halting my advance so quickly, but I could still use my telekinesis rune. I strengthened my left arm with as much mana as I could in the last split second, raising it beside my head to block. A flickering of fire coated the limb, hopefully able to offset the force of the ice. I whipped my right arm, still holding my dagger, out to the side as quickly as possible. I pushed hard against the ground with my telekinesis, but measured the output to be a more constant push rather than launching me. Nareni's shin rocked against my fire-coated forearm, sending a shudder through my entire body. It felt like I had been hit by a metal bat instead of a leg. The push I used against the ground helped bolster me against the opposing force, allowing me to stand against the blow despite my rickety balance. The ice around Nareni's shin shattered, blowing out the fire around my arm in the process. The mana shroud around my limb almost crumpled from the force. I stood my ground. Nareni's attack hadn't accounted for such a sturdy block. She was left off balance, tipping backward in the air. I wasn't going to let her regain her footing. Using another telekinetic push, I added a decent bit of force to a fist-sized area around her stomach. My spell glimmered white, then impacted the young rogue's unprotected gut. Her eyes widened as she wheezed. She toppled onto her back with a groan, the pole of ice she used forgotten. That's what you get for trying to knock my head off, I said with relish. I shook my arm, trying to work feeling back into it. Damn, that's going to bruise badly. I sheathed my dagger, then offered the young woman a hand. My right one this time, since my left arm didn't agree with her prior treatment of it. Nareni took my hand, allowing me to help her to her feet. She was still trying to catch her breath. Carcian clapped from the sidelines. Good show, Torin. Smart use of your power's versatility, he said. Nareni, you need to work on not overcommitting on your attacks. You were left too open after Torin blocked your attack. I winced. Nareni managed to nail me in the arm exactly where the scander had taken a rip out on my first day in this world. It had healed over with only a slight scar, but I needed to stop putting my body through such rigorous treatment. Nareni looked disgruntled at the criticism, but she nodded along as Carcian told her a few points where she could have done better. Your last attack had far too much force behind it, too. Not good for a spar. Then the man turned to me. I felt a bit nervous, as my only combat teacher had been Lady Dawn. She had given me many pointers on combat form and how to handle myself, but she couldn't actually spar with me to help me hone my instincts and skills. This was new. You're good, Torin. Better than I expected, but there are some glaring flaws with how you approach this match. How so? I asked. I thought I had performed well in my first magic spar. I played by your rules, even won the match. Nareni pouted from the side. The most important thing you need to fix? You overcommitted. I frowned. I didn't make any attack I couldn't conceivably recover from, I said, thinking of how Nareni had been left wide open after her kick. I hadn't done anything like that. I don't see your point. I never said you overcommitted to an attack, Carcian replied. You took a very dangerous risk at the very end. When my protege threw that kick, you were not in a place to dodge it gracefully or block easily. But considering my footing, I would have been grounded after that dodge, I said, confused. Nareni would have held the victory if I lost that position. Recovery would have been very difficult. And plus, I did block that attack. To my credit, Nareni seemed bewildered by this avenue of criticism as well. You barely blocked it, Torin, Carcian said, looking at me. This was a spar. Nareni shouldn't have tried to strike you with such force, but neither should you have attempted to take it head on. The point of these exercises isn't just to win, it's to improve. He looked at me seriously. And you can't do that if you get your brains knocked around by a kick. So I should have gone to the ground? I asked. Forfeited the match? Carcian crossed his arms. Yes, I can tell from your movements. You're used to fighting for real, without the safety measures a spar allows. Your instincts tell you that the only thing you can do is block. If you go to the ground, you're dead. So you're more willing to break a bone than to forfeit a spar. When I say you overcommitted, I meant you were overcommitted to the fight itself. I exhaled through my nose, thinking over what Carcian had told me. He did have a point, at least to a degree. All of my fights so far had been in the Corwood Forest, where a moment of weakness meant death. I couldn't let my back hit the ground, or the next attack would be at my throat. I didn't realize how ingrained that had become. Point taken, I said. You're right about the last part though. I'm not used to this. That's the benefit of sparring, Nareni replied. And I'm sorry for almost kicking your head off, she added sheepishly. It just looked very, very appealing to do so. Was that actually an apology? Or was she just saying my face looked very punchable? There's more you need to work on, Carcian said, causing me to focus on him. But you'll need a demonstration to understand. The rat stepped into the ring. Chapter 28, Librarians. Published by Web Novel. Discordant note, TBATE. Torin Dane was weak, crushed under the oppressive boot of the Vreetra's strength-based society. But after the desperate last gamble of a failing deity imbues him with more knowledge than he ever dreamed of, he is forced to enter a proxy war between the Surin clans that has lasted for untold generations. Armed with knowledge of the future and the potential to change it, Torin will have to face high-bloods, corrupt churches, dangerous beasts, and power-hungry Asura to get what he needs. If he wishes to survive, he will have to alter the future in a way that will keep him and those he cares for safe from the approaching tide of war and death, all while hiding a burning secret in his core from the very leaders of the continent he lives on. For Alakria, and by extension, Torin himself is a mere piece in a larger game between the gods. And when deities play chess with the lives of mortals as pawns, only bloodshed follows. Semi-SI into Alakria. Updates daily. Cover art commissioned by @Afra_. Torin Dane. Carcian settled into a stance, beckoning me forward. His confidence made me wary, but I pressed on anyway. With mana-enhanced speed, I lashed a fist out toward him in a jab. Carcian slipped the punch with supernatural agility, but I had expected that. He crouched slightly, a hand raised to ward off my attack. Capitalizing on this opening, a flare of white began to shiver into existence near the striker's abdomen, poised to deliver a similar gut blow as I had given to Nareni. He wouldn't be able to block it with his arm, as that was busy turning my punch away. I was ready to follow up after the eventual blow. After my telekinesis impacted him, I'd follow up with a kick to the abdomen again. Carcian didn't have a mana shroud that I could see, meaning my attack would hit flesh. A dozen other possibilities flashed in my mind as a second passed by. Instead of that happening, however, Carson's knee began to churn with water. He raised it high, smacking through my still-forming telekinetic push before it could fully coalesce. The mana shattered into 1,000 shards, shocking me and causing me to pull back. The only other time my telekinesis had been shattered was by. The rat tilted his head, a mocking smirk on his face. Well, Torin, I'm waiting for you to actually attack me, he said. Unnerved, I instead conjured a few small fireballs around me. They arced toward the waiting Carcian, who burst into a puff of mist as my attack hit. Water vapor spread around the small arena, twisting and curling over the smooth stone. I shifted in place, wary of what was next. My senses were dampened in the midst of the mist, similar to what happened when the unseen world eclipsed my senses. I'll have to get rid of the mists, then, I thought. Deciding to take matters into my own hand, I focused for several precious seconds, then pushed outward with an unfocused wave of flame. It sizzled where it contacted the mist, dispersing it wherever the two intertwined. I suddenly became aware of an attack hurtling toward me. Whatever the mist had done to disturb my senses abruptly lifted. I spun, a coating of flame over my forearm as I swung my hand through whatever neared me. My hand seared straight through Carcian, neatly cutting through his torso. I felt a momentary panic before I registered the lack of sensation. Where my hand cut through, a curtain of mist billowed out. A clone? There was no resistance as my attack whiffed through, only light dampness on my skin and a cool, tingling sensation where the mist touched my skin. The illusory clone of Carcian exploded in water vapor after it was bisected, the same sense-dampening effect multiplied tenfold when it coated me so close. I pushed out with telekinesis, trying to move across the ground. I knew instinctively that another attack was coming, but my telekinetic push never connected with the ground. Instead, a boot coalesced out of the gloom and slammed into the white mana, breaking it once more. But that alerted me to the true body's position. Carcian could create clones of mist, but they had no physical presence. I threw a grenade of sound toward the location I had seen the boot but was surprised when the figure blurred. I detonated my sound grenade early, realizing I didn't have much time. Mist obscured much of my vision, and I didn't have the focus to release another wave of flame around me. That wasn't one of my template spells, after all. My grenade blew a neat gap into the mist, but it slowly sifted back in. But my attack had failed anyway. A bare outline of a man neatly pirouetted around the explosion, closing the distance with unnatural speed and grace. I backpedaled as best I could, trying to escape. I hurled a few fireballs his way, but my aim was off. The mist obscured my senses too much, and my opponent was a bare outline in the room. My back hit something hard. I felt stone against my shoulder blades, shocking me. I hadn't been able to sense my surroundings with my usual confidence, and I had backed into one of the support pillars for the cistern. The mist dispersed abruptly, vanishing into the non-existent wind. Carcian stood on the opposite edge of the ring, far away from where I had thought he was. I realized with a start that what I had been attacking all along in the mist must have been one of those godforsaken clones. The man had been far from me all along. I remembered how the boot had broken my telekinesis spell. Did that mean his clones could manifest physical force, or did the interaction of our spells merely cancel each other out? Or did the man dart in to break my spell and leave a clone in his place? I settled back into my stance, ready to continue the match. Carcian wagged his finger though. Nah, he said, pointing to the ground. I followed his gesture, realizing with disappointment I was outside of the delineated circle. I lost the spar by ring out. I sighed. You led me around like a fish on a hook, I said, a bit irritated. Couldn't the man actually face me? Nareni lounged nearby, an expression of keen interest on her face. That I did, Torin. But do you understand why? Your mist obscures your presence, and I couldn't distinguish your clones from your true self. You baited me to believe you were in one place when you were truly in another. That's the how, not the why. Why did I avoid fighting you? Why are you outside the ring and not dealing with the concussion I could have given you instead? He said, tapping a finger against his forehead. I thought for a moment. Why did the man avoid directly trading blows with me? I don't know, I said, confused. We're thieves, the man said at last. Our goal is to grab our target and leave. We don't want to stay and fight. Fighting means that disgruntled authorities have time to catch us, which would mean that the poor coins we liberate will never reach freedom. We want to lead people around on a merry chase. He strode over to me. It's a performance as any other, Torin. He walked past me, headed toward another room I hadn't explored yet. Also, when you use your telekinesis rune, your eyes track to where you plan to put the effect. It's easy to exploit. I remembered how the man had broken through each and every one of my attempts to use telekinesis throughout the fight. Had I been that predictable? Thanks, I said, running over the spar. I had much to learn. Nareni approached me after. You did well against our good old leader, she said conversationally. He played me like a puppet on a string, I said, shaking my head, and used it to make a point at the same time. If he actually wanted to hurt me, I was pretty sure he could have taken me out early with ease. I could barely sense the man within the mists. Carcian held full control of the battlefield, not unlike how he controlled our first meeting. Usually he just thrashes us early on, Nareni said, but considering most of us only have a few runes, there isn't much to draw out. She looked at me appraising Ly. How many runes do you actually have? I noticed at least 5 different spells there. My shoulders tensed. I only had 1 rune, but it wasn't like I could say that. I'd rather not say, I said instead. Nareni shrugged. It's good to keep that secret anyway, she said. A surprising number of mages openly display their runes, but we of the rats don't. That would make it too easy to identify us, maybe even more so than showing our faces. But you certainly have more than most of us, save maybe Carcian himself. She smiled. Showing runes is stupid anyways. It's like showing off your wealth. It makes you an easy target. The moment was interrupted by a young man entering from where Carcian had exited. He plodded forward, seemingly unaware of the two of us. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place from where. His clothes were slightly disheveled but were more casual attire than anybody else here. Nareni immediately brightened. Wade, she called, waving a hand. Come here, you've got to meet our new member. Wade, I thought, the name clicking into place. Sure enough, the man who meandered toward us was the scruffy-haired library receptionist I met a few days ago. Wade, I said, utterly shocked. From the library? He raised a brow. I told you my night job took up a lot of my time, the young man said, adjusting his glasses. I just didn't tell you what it was. Good to see you again, Torin. I blinked, then pieces began to click into place all over. That's how you knew who I was, I said, pointing at the man. I went to the library to look up information on acid beam hornets the day after you, I said, pointing at Nareni. Gave me info that Bloodjohn would attack their nest. It must have been blatantly obvious, I realized, internally berating myself for leaving such a simple trail. The bookworm laughed lightly. And the day before, you were searching for knowledge of the local bloods, all in your civilian identity. It didn't take long for us to put 2 and 2 together, he said, sparing a glance at Nareni. And not much gets by my eyes, either, he said with a knowing look. A rat bounded over the tiles toward us, hopped up Wade's leg, then climbed to his shoulder. It sat there, perfectly content, as if it wasn't a wild animal. Wade put his hands in his pockets, clearly savoring my confusion. While Carcian is the rat, I'd argue I embody the title more, he said with a hint of pride. The critter on his shoulder chittered. Wade manages our information network, Nareni said happily, clapping him on the shoulder. Wade's eyes darted to her hand, a note of something in his eyes. He's got rats all over the city reporting to him. You'd be amazed what the people will talk about in the open. Wade coughed into a fist, some of his earlier confidence wilting under the praise. I've got a crest that allows me to communicate intent to rats. I send them out, and whenever they overhear something that they think I'd find interesting, they report back. It's got a limited range, though. The rat on his shoulder squeaked in, agreement? What? Our resident rat whisperer, Nareni said, removing her hand from Wade's shoulder. The young man looked visibly disappointed. We wouldn't be able to pull off half the heists we do without his help, she said. Wade smiled lightly. I had Carson's letter delivered to you earlier, he said. Our leader called me in on my off hours, though, so I'm going to go get reparations for that tonight. Something Wade said startled Nareni. Oh, yeah, she said. I need to go. Carcian promised he'd get me a new cloak earlier, and if I'm not quick he'll weasel out of it, she finished, turning to go. See the both of you later, she called back, moving toward where Wade had entered. The young sentry watched her go. I gave Wade a knowing look. He frowned in confusion. So, you and Nareni? I said, feigning nonchalance. The way he looked at her seemed painfully apparent to me. Wade sighed. Shut it, Torin, he said, though there was something wistful in his tone. You never told me what kind of books you read when we talked at the library, I continued on, undeterred. I looked at Wade, then widened my eyes comically. Is it poetry? If you want to woo a lady, that would be the best way. Professing your love in prose would be awfully romantic, wouldn't it? The rat on Wade's shoulder jumped at me, sailing through the air and latching onto my face. It dropped a second later, landing easily and scurrying off into the darkness with a chitter. Unfortunately, the undignified yelp I emitted as it hit me offset my banter. You're going to find rat droppings in your pillow, Wade said, narrowing his eyes behind his glasses. I promise you that. Recovering from the rodent's assault, I snickered in good humor. That's not a no, I said, tugging the lion's tail. I reconsidered my next words though, because I didn't know what else I'd find in my pillowcase if I kept on. I wouldn't have expected you to work for these wealth redistributors, I said, my amusement at the continued phrase surfacing in my tone. You seem more like a quiet type when I met you at the library. This night job has got to be action-packed, though. Wade gestured for me to follow him, and I sat trailed by his side as he moved toward one part of the cistern. We're thieves, plain and simple, Wade said. The others like to dress it up, but that's what they are. But what sets us apart from common pickpockets is what we do with the money we steal, he said. Wade led me to the map that was pinned to one of the walls. It was a detailed depiction of important Fiocran infrastructure. There were color-coded pins all over the map. Wade plucked a purple pin from its place, showing it to me. Each purple pin marks one of the fences we sell our stolen goods to, he said. And the majority of the money, everything that isn't used on upkeep for our little gang, is used to buy food, clothes, and more for the people in East Fiatra. My vision narrowed to that purple pin, considering. So they were Robin Hood-esque thieves? That was certainly more noble than a self-interested gang. So you're altruistic? I asked. You worry for the people of the slums? It is nice to help people, Wade affirmed. But I've got my own reasons, too. We all do. Nareni wants to give blind addicts a way out. Hoffel wants us to survive. He paused. I'm actually not sure what Carcian wants. To show off, maybe? I wasn't sure if I trusted pure altruism, anyway. I waited for a moment, but when it was clear he wasn't going to elaborate, I asked another question. Considering Bloodjohn has a kill order out on me, I'm not sure I'll be able to return the books I borrowed from the library, I said a bit sardonically. It was hard not to feel bitter about that. Are you going to turn me over to them if I don't return the books on time? I asked, trying to lighten my mood. Not after only 2 weeks, no, he replied ominously. But once a month passes, drastic measures will need to be taken. After all, keeping a book from new readers is a capital crime. He considered for a moment. All jokes aside, I can return them for you. I snorted, but withdrew the books from my dimension ring nonetheless. I handed them to Wade, who looked them over for a minute. It might not be much solace, but from what little my network gathered so far, I doubt the Jones will be able to keep the pressure on these other families to maintain this search for you. After a couple of weeks, you'll probably be in the clear, at least from the city at large. Why don't the Jones just try and report me to the supervisory office? I asked, a bit confused. If the Jones got a warrant out for my arrest, no matter how long I waited in a forest, I'd be a wanted man in the city. I thought about the actions the Granbells would take against Arthur in response to his involvement in Ezra and Callan's deaths, seeing how much more efficient that was. I don't think I'd be able to actually just wait out their searches as I have before. The law would be on their side. Bloodjohn isn't the most politically adept of bloods in Fiatra, Wade replied. Their go-to method for most things is brute force, not cunning. They've got a lot of debts piling up now because they don't have that finesse. I know some of the details, but the Jones took a huge hit when you disrupted their acid beam paper retrieval. I groaned, massaging the bridge of my nose with a hand. Why does everyone think I deliberately sabotaged that mission? I did everything I could to avoid that. Something went wrong and the rich and powerful need somebody to blame, Torin. You were kinda in the perfect spot for that, Wade pointed out. So the one time they make a politically adept move, I'm the target. Of course. It was the exact opposite of politically adept, the young librarian countered, sitting down in a plush chair that bordered the map. There's a dozen accounts contradicting the Jones from those you helped out. They just came in today, but they're too loud to silence. Unfortunately for the Jones, the only alternative is admitting they hired a bunch of unadorned and miscalculated horribly. Everyone worth their salt will know that the Jones are lying about your guilt. And that kind of shame, they'll be a laughingstock among the more powerful families. I peered at Wade over my hand. I was gaining a measure of him through this conversation. He had a greater understanding of Fiacre's politics than I did, which made sense. I wondered how much sway he had in those politics. I opened my mouth, but my ears picked up something coming toward us. I peered toward a darker part of the cistern, cocking my head as the pitter-patter came closer. Soon enough, a rat bounded out of the darkness. A small slip of paper was gripped tightly in its teeth. The rat hopped over toward Wade, dodging past my legs and hopping up his leg and onto his shoulder. Wade retrieved the paper from its mouth, absent-mindedly scratching the little critter as he read over the message. Once he was done, he pulled a lighter out of his pocket. He flicked it on, then let the paper burn under the small flame. What was that about? I asked, curious. Nothing you need to worry about, he replied, pocketing the lighter. The rat bounded off into the darkness. Though I don't think you've met our last member, he said, standing from the seat. She's been looking forward to meeting you. Also, she's the one who assured us of your character. Chapter 29, Another Receptionist. Published by Web Novel. Discordant note, TBATE. Torrin Dane was weak, crushed under the oppressive boot of the Vreeter's strength-based society. But after the desperate last gamble of a failing deity imbues him with more knowledge than he ever dreamed of, he is forced to enter a proxy war between the Surin clans that has lasted for untold generations. Armed with knowledge of the future and the potential to change it, Torrin will have to face high bloods, corrupt churches, dangerous beasts, and power-hungry Asura to get what he needs. If he wishes to survive, he will have to alter the future in a way that will keep him and those he cares for safe from the approaching tide of war and death, all while hiding a burning secret in his core from the very leaders of the continent he lives on. For Alakria, and by extension, Torrin himself is a mere piece in a larger game between the gods. And when deities play chess with the lives of mortals as pawns, only bloodshed follows. Semi-SI into Alakria. Updates daily. Cover art commissioned by @_Afra_. Torrin Dane. It turned out there was another exit from the cistern, a simple ladder that opened under a decrepit building. It had been 15 minutes since I left the cistern, and I was still silently fuming about having to go through the sewers. If there was an entrance right there, why? Of course, I knew the reason. If you wanted a swifter getaway, the sewers were more efficient and didn't leave a trail like everything else. But I was a freak for cleanliness, and that trait had only been exacerbated by my forced stay in the Clearwood forest. Being unable to wash and clean myself reliably made me crave baths and showers with a religious fervor. I'd have to get over it, though. Wade led me through alleyways, guiding me through mazes of broken-down buildings. We did our best to avoid unfriendly eyes, which was easier than I expected. We maintained stealth for a while, but Wade slowly relaxed as we got farther from the cistern's secret entrance. The early evening light helped mask our movements. There's not much of a point trying to maintain cover now, Wade said. We were both wearing cloaks to ward off the chill, which drew the attention of many of the people we passed. I could see the greed in their eyes, which made me vehemently disagree with the young librarian. We were wearing hats to cover our hair, which would hopefully make attempts to identify us more difficult. I flared my killing intent when a nearby ruffian with yellow-green spots on his skin started looking a little too long at us. He flinched, then quickly averted his eyes. That man wasn't the first person I'd had to flex my metaphoric muscles at to make them back off. Considering I just had to use my killing intent for the 5th time in the last 10 minutes, I think I disagree, I said. Oh, you'll always run the risk of getting robbed this deep into East Fiatra, Wade replied, a hint of annoyance entering his voice. It's how things are out here, but we won't get tracked back to base. I shot an uncertain look at my companion. How does anybody own anything here? You don't, Wade replied in a clipped tone. Most of East Fiatra is made up of non-mages. They rot here, out of sight from those who can't stand the filth. The Bloods like to pretend this district doesn't exist. I winced internally, thinking once more about how deeply I desired to be clean. Wade shook his head. It's something you'll get used to if you live here long enough. You sound like you know this place, I said, stepping over a rotting slat of wood in the street. I grew up here, Wade said, raising a hand to stop me. One of his rats scampered over, no doubt delivering a report of some kind. After a second he waved me on, moving to a short, squat building. I know this place as well as any. You don't live here anymore? I asked. I got out once I manifested my runes, he said. It's easier to get a paying job with magic. Most leave after they do and don't look back. He opened the door to the building, which creaked on its hinges. The doorknob looked like it was ready to fall out of its frame. Inside was a small apartment complex, not unlike the one I used to live in. It was far more decrepit, though, with dust and debris all along the hallway. I never realized things were this bad, I said. Torrin never left his little section of East Fiatra, which was closer to the richer parts of the city. Though he met plenty of poor folks, I was realizing he was quite sheltered for a young mage. I'm sorry you had to grow up with this, I finished. You were privileged, Wade said matter-of-factly. Working at the library, I meet enough young people to know that most mages are. You're an exception to the rule, at least so far, the young librarian said scoffing. I doubt most of them know what a slum even is. Wade pointed at a man who was curled under a leaning building, huddled in on himself and moaning. That is what they want to dismiss. It took me a minute to realize the man wasn't groaning in pain. It was in pleasure. He's high on Blythe, Wade said. It's a hell of a drug, but it makes the rounds here. You can't step into an alleyway without breaking a needle under your feet. I knew about Blythe. It was a powerful addictive drug, nicknamed the Hive Mother's Honey. Whenever patients came to the Healers Guild suffering withdrawal symptoms, there wasn't much anybody could do but let them run their course, but there was almost always permanent damage. The effects of addiction started with chronic chills, then sunken skin. Eventually, the nails on each hand would simply fall off as the body deteriorated. Looking around, I could see another person curled on the ground, no doubt experiencing the same sort of ecstasy. His hand had a splotch of greenish-yellow taint, a sign of prolonged addiction. He would die within the next couple of months with the symptoms that far along. I swallowed as I finally connected the dots to the yellow-green spots I'd seen on so many people. I had thought it was some sort of disease at first, unwilling to believe it was so regular. It's that common? I whispered, suddenly subdued. I had felt a bit of anger at being called privileged, but in comparison to growing up around addiction? Wade didn't answer. I stared up at the building Wade led me to, eager to escape thoughts of drugs and addiction. So, who are we meeting here? Wade knocked on one of the apartment doors. Somebody you know, he said. She asked us to take you in and protect you. The door opened, revealing a short woman with brown hair pulled into a haphazard bun. She fidgeted lightly with something in her hand, which I realized after a moment was a small knife. I recognized the middle-aged woman immediately. It was Greed, the receptionist from the East Fiatra Healers Guild. The woman had been there to greet Torrin for the many years he had worked as a healer's assistant, always waving him in with a smile. She had also helped him in his mastery of the violin, which was something I looked back on fondly. Great's wariness vanished beneath a smile once she saw who was at her door. "Ah, Wade, I didn't expect you today. It's nice to see you." She looked past him, spotting me. Her eyes widened and she gasped, holding a hand to her mouth. "Oh, Torrin, I didn't know if you were okay." She looked outside the door, peering either way. "Come on in, both of you. I wasn't prepared for guests this late, but I'll do my best." I shuffled in awkwardly after Wade, feeling a bit disconcerted by the meeting. Greed shut the door behind us, locking it with a rickety deadbolt. "It's good to see you again, Greed," I said, peering over her apartment. It was an organized mess, with items laid in haphazard groups around. I've missed my work at the Healers Guild. The Healers Guild was from a time when everything was simple for Torrin, before his world turned upside down. For all the gritty things he had to see healing people, it was a fulfilling time of his life. "It's nice to hear you say so, young man," she said, returning the knife she held to her sleeve. "After you vanished, everybody was worried that Blood Joan had gotten to you, but they came by to ask about you every now and then, so I had hope." The older woman smiled demurely, looking over at Wade. I asked my old friend Carcian if he could keep an eye out for you and keep you safe if he could. The man can be harsh, but I know he's got a heart of gold. The woman said. I looked over to Wade, who was pointedly ignoring my gaze. Just keep an eye out? I asked, a bit uncomfortable. Of course, she said, not noticing my emphasis. The Jones will eventually leave you alone. They're horrible men, Torin, but they'll get tired and move on to whatever new trend there is, Greed said, oblivious to my growing discomfort. That's what lords do. She doesn't know I joined the crew, I realized. Carcian hadn't just kept an eye on me, he'd actively gone out of his way to recruit me, and after my interference with their expedition, Blood Joan could never afford to leave me alone. Well, it's a bit more complicated than that, I said. I hadn't interacted with anybody from Torin's old life extensively, but I felt a bit of unexpected shame welling up. This woman thought I was going to just lie low and then go back to working at the Healers Guild. Instead, I was going to be a thief. That was very different from a healer. How do you know Carcian? Are you a part of his crew? I asked. The woman gestured for me to sit in a nearby chair. I knew him when he was just a boy, Greed said, moving to a nearby kitchen. Before he got those dreams of being an ascender and ran off, she added. She looked suddenly somber, just like you and Norgan, I suppose. I held my eyes shut. I was avoiding thinking of my brother too much, I knew. It wasn't healthy, but I've got an instiller's rune. Every now and then I'll use it for him and his friends, she continued. Would either of you like tea? No thank you, I replied. Wade declined as well, leaving the woman somewhat unsure. Maybe one day I'll be an ascender still, I said, remembering my brother in my dream. It tasted like ashes in my mouth. You said Carcian was an ascender? I said, wishing to learn more about my leader-to-be. He got a few runes when he was a teen, Greed said, settling down in her own seat. In her hands was a steaming cup of tea, then set off to fulfill every lad's dream of earning glory in the relictombs. Then, about a year ago, he came back to us. He grew up in East Fiatra? I asked, a bit surprised. That he did, Greed said, sipping her tea. The woman was a bit fidgety, but she managed to quell that now. She furrowed her brow. I wish he wouldn't do the things he currently does, she said, looking sad. It's not good to steal. That brings the wrong sort of attention to the folks around here, she finished. The man uses his power for the good of the people here, Wade argued, fixing his glasses. Nobody else does. The other gangs around only fight for themselves, leaving the common person here broken and dead. What he does is good. Greed clenched her teacup a bit harder. There's got to be a better way to help, she said. But I can't stop him. You don't approve of what he does, but you just said you help him with your instiller powers, I asked, confused. Doesn't that enable him? If he won't stop, Greed said, tucking a lock of hair behind her ear, I'll do what I can to keep him alive. He was a good boy when he was young. Our little chat continued on in more demure topics of conversation for a little while more. It felt relieving in a way to speak with somebody I used to know, who had shared many an experience. I even spotted Great She's lute in the corner, the same instrument she had used to demonstrate some of her music for me once. At the recollection, the older woman had smiled lightly, asking if I still had my nice violin. I didn't have a heart to tell her I'd left it behind. A while later, I left the apartment with Wade. Talking with Greed relieved some stress I didn't know existed. It had been so long since I had had a conversation with somebody so relaxed. But as we meandered in the general direction of the cistern, a growing tension built in me. She doesn't know I'm actually one of the rats now, I said, reaching the topic. She thinks I'm simply under your and Carson's protection, I said, side-eyeing my companion. Wade sighed. You never actually told her you were one of us, he replied. There's no reason for her to think otherwise, but from the way he kept his eyes forward, I knew there was something to this. Except it's easy to guess I joined, I countered. She never seemed to even consider the idea. A beat of silence followed. Greed told Carcian very explicitly to not try and invite you to the crew, he finally admitted. She wanted you to be protected, not drawn into his business. She's a kind woman, far too good for this place. Greed didn't want to think I was part of the rats, so she completely ignored the signs that I was. I observed the skyline. The sun had set, and it would be dark before long. I promised somebody that I wouldn't take vengeance on the Jones, I said, a bit of shame keeping me from looking back at the building we had left. And that promise is already practically broken. I wondered what she would think of me if she knew I had sworn that on the Vritra. Would she be disappointed, as she was in Carcian, or would she be hurt that I lied to her? I don't think that's a promise that could have been kept, Wade said. Not with a brother dead. He's right, I thought, using that understanding to quash the shame. Would I be able to live with myself if I let the Jones go? If they were allowed to just carry on after taking my brother from me? Maybe if I was a better man. Lady Dawn assisted me with my assimilation later that night, helping mana seep into my muscles and bones. It was getting easier and easier to do, my own control drifting closer to that of the Phoenix's guiding hand day by day. I was still a millennium away from reaching her level of control, but I was exponentially better than when I first started. I was sitting on my new bed in the cistern, alone with my thoughts. Wade was in the main room, doing some sort of planning on the map. I didn't know where everybody else was. My earlier meeting with Greed repeated in my head. Why did you agree to help me? I asked abruptly, my concentration breaking. I still couldn't really make sense of why the Asura decided to be my bond and will. Greed helped Carcian, even when she didn't agree with what he was doing. But I had never asked my bond why she assisted me, and she rarely ever interfered with my actions. It didn't make sense to me. For all you knew, I was one of Agrona's pawns. I don't get it. You've proven yourself genuine, Lady Dawn replied. We would be unable to bond if you bore me ill will, she deflected. But before that, I thought, I had said things only Agrona might know at this stage. She should have smitten me on the spot. Lady Dawn seemed to sense my questions. I was not whole when we made our pact, the Phoenix said at last. My emotions were erratic and my mind a blur. So soon after my spell, I had not fully regained my own sense of self. But despite this, I could discern a core truth about you. I turned to the Phantom, something in her words compelling me. Your desire for vengeance was as pure as any fire, she said in a low voice. It was separate from the High Sovereign. Emotion such as that is outside his understanding. He is not capable of such unfiltered feeling. Quote. My mouth felt dry. I've made very few promises since coming to this world, I said, feeling bitter. And I've broken many of them already. I don't want to break any more. I had promised Greed I'd avoid taking vengeance on the Jones. I had sworn an oath to the Vritra for the same to Trelza. And I promised the Jones bloody vengeance but had yet to fulfill it. I didn't regret breaking those oaths. The Vritra were closer to demons than gods, and any oaths I swore on their name would be curses. But my word meant a great deal to me, and I could imagine the disappointment of those from Torin's life seeing what I was doing. And I had promised Lady Dawn I would stop the reincarnation of the legacy. Once upon a time, you mentioned that my plans for you must have gone awry, Lady Dawn said, drawing my attention. You were correct, contractor. In truth, your survival was unprecedented. I did not expect your soul to last the journey, simply carry my own to its destination. What do you mean? I asked, confused. Lady Dawn considered for a moment. Souls linger for a short while after the death of the body, then drift to the beyond. Yours, contractor, resisted the pull of the beyond longer than I expected. Instead of dissipating after the spell was completed, yours anchored itself in another host. One that was suitable for it, she said. This vessel would not keep my soul contained long. I would drift off to the ether once my task was finished. But you inadvertently provided me something I did not have for a long, long time. A choice for my future. I swallowed, taken aback by the emotion in her words. I looked at my hands. She doesn't expect me to succeed, I realized. She simply relished being able to act. I didn't know what to feel about that. She didn't expect me to actually follow through on my pact. She didn't believe I'd manage it. That hurt in a way I didn't expect. I remembered the words she told me when we first made our contract. I shall hold you to your word, she'd said. I will hold to mine. All this talk of my reincarnation pulled questions to the fore, about how I was here in the first place, how I looked like I did in my previous life, why Norgan looked like my brother from Earth, and why Torin and I felt so mutually devastated over Norgan, despite him being an objectively different person than any person I knew. And as I looked into Lady Dawn's eyes, I realized that she might answer. She waited there, her translucent form stiff with expectation. She knelt on the bed, her hands crossed steadily over the lap of her sundress. She met my gaze with a note of hesitation. You spoke of choice, I said instead, but you haven't tried to influence my own. Why do you let me act so freely? I questioned. The only times the Phoenix truly commanded me was during my training in the Clearwood Forest. Outside of that, she hadn't spoken her opinion on much at all. I don't think you agree with every choice I've made. Lady Dawn's posture relaxed. Was that relief? I questioned myself, noting the change. You're a coward. I chastised myself, recognizing the chance to question the circumstances of my reincarnation was past. Many of your decisions have been short-sighted and rash, perhaps bordering on lunacy, Lady Dawn said bluntly. Ouch, but despite the depths of our bond, I have no right to impose my will over yours. Your choices are your own. I looked around my room, which would be my base of operations for the foreseeable future. My walk through the destitute streets called back to me. I still had so much to learn. Could you advise me from now on? I asked sincerely. I'm not sure of half the choices I've made myself, either. It would be nice to have a second opinion, from a viewpoint that isn't so small. A small firelight popped into existence over my palm, dancing in tune with my mana flow. There are so few people I can trust in this new world. I'd like to trust you. Lady Dawn looked surprised by my request. Very well, she said at last, watching the firelight with me. You shall have my counsel. Chapter 30. The Art of Thievery. Published by web novel. Discordant note, TBATE. Torrin Dane was weak, crushed under the oppressive boot of the Vreetra's strength-based society. But after the desperate last gamble of a failing deity imbues him with more knowledge than he ever dreamed of, he is forced to enter a proxy war between the Surin clans that has lasted for untold generations. Armed with knowledge of the future and the potential to change it, Torrin will have to face high bloods, corrupt churches, dangerous beasts, and power-hungry Asura to get what he needs. If he wishes to survive, he will have to alter the future in a way that will keep him and those he cares for safe from the approaching tide of war and death, all while hiding a burning secret in his core from the very leaders of the continent he lives on. For Alakria, and by extension, Torrin himself is a mere piece in a larger game between the gods. And when deities play chess with the lives of mortals as pawns, only bloodshed follows. Semi-SI into Alakria. Updates daily. Cover art commissioned by @_Afra_. Torrin Dane. Do you know what makes or breaks a heist? Carcian asked, leisurely walking down the streets of East Fiatra. He wasn't wearing his rat ensemble, but a simple half mask covering his forehead and eyes. And I don't mean getting caught or failing to lay out a contingency plan. Tell me, Torrin, the essence of thievery. We were touring the northern parts of the district. There was a dampness to every surface that seemed to seep into the heart of the suburb. The small coating of snow from a few days ago had begun to melt, making the dirt roads muddy and wet. Small orange firelights burned within shuttered windows. A few toughs around an alleyway stared Carcian and me down, watching us with dark expressions as we moved by. Those men were fighters. Wouldn't it be the element of surprise? I asked, unsure. A plan to steal something will never work if it's expected. Carcian tisked. Not quite, he said, turning down an alleyway. Sensing something behind us, I shifted my stance and glanced behind me. Was it the toughs from before? You can steal from somebody, even if they're expecting you all along. That's because the essence of theft, Carcian said, drawing my attention back to him, is misdirection. He was twirling a dagger in his hand, deftly whirling the steel through his fingers. A very familiar dagger. I squawked in outrage, grabbing at my belt. Sure enough, my weapon was gone. The man had swiped it in the split second I had looked behind me. How? I said, baffled. There was a good 4 feet between us, and I had only looked away for a moment. Just that instant, the ruffians I had noticed earlier crowded into the mouth of the alleyway. There were 5 of them, each tall and strong. There wasn't much meat on their bones, probably from lack of food. But they were imposing and held a palpable bloodlust. Looks like we've got a few new neighbors in town, the lead man said. There were only a few hairs on his head, which were weathered and worn. He was missing more than a few teeth. How about we show them the ropes? I thrust my hand to Carcian, my palm open. Give that back, I said, ignoring the men. I spent good money on that knife and had grown attached to it in the past month. You've proven your point. The ruffians snickered. They think we're playing about, don't they? How's about we show them why they shouldn't ignore us? The lead man said, nudging his fellows. Touchy about your things, are we? Carcian chided me, tossing the dagger in the air. Sensing an opportunity, I pulled on it with a flare of white telekinesis, causing it to lurch toward me. I caught it by the handle, deftly sheathing the weapon once more. At the sight of my obvious magic, the men trying to box us in suddenly looked very, very unsure. Carcian shook his head. You've ruined half the fun already, Torrin, he said with a sigh. Now they'll run. Sure enough, the men turned, shuffling to get away from 2 people who were obviously mages. They shouted apologies as they bolted out of the alleyway, scrambling to get away from us. Carcian whistled. That was faster than expected. I raised a brow, crossing my arms in irritation. The rat ignored me, continuing on. But as I said, the art of thievery is misdirection. Quote. A form materialized out of mist at his feet, growing from the ground like a sprout. In a second, a mirror image of Carcian stood by his side. The clone dropped a pouch into the original's hand, then gave a deep bow. The illusory form of mist dispersed into the alleyway, its task complete. So the clones did have a physical presence. Carcian hefted the bag in front of me. Those bandits were entirely focused on the 2 of us. The fools didn't even consider they might be the ones getting robbed. He tilted his head. If only they didn't let themselves be drawn into a trap. Carcian tossed the pouch to me, which I caught with one hand. Inside were a few copper marks. It wasn't that much money. First rule of theft. Wherever somebody isn't looking is where they can be stolen from, he said cheerily. I frowned at the pouch. You told me you only stole from wealthy bloods. Carcian rolled his eyes, dismissing my concerns. The rats as a whole only work together to steal from those up above. What each of us does on our own time could be something entirely different, he continued. Besides, those men would have been entirely content leaving our bodies in this alley if they could manage it. I sighed. We continued to walk for the next few hours, attracting the attention of men who believed they could rob us. It didn't take nearly as long as I expected to get the hang of snagging coin purses. The confidence of the assailants helped. For all they knew, Carcian and I were a couple of well-dressed merchants or tourists. Our clothes weren't of the best quality, but they were clean. That made us stand out like a spot of white amidst a sea of black. My telekinetic pushes and pulls were amazing for covertly snatching items off my targets. I had to focus a lot more on fine control. I hadn't tried to dim the light of mana that my crest emitted before this, but it was possible if I concentrated hard enough. I actually managed to untie a man's rope belt as he tried to approach with a light tug of my power. Part of me felt guilty over taking the coins from my unwitting victims, but the other part of me realized that there was no way this money was earned honestly. How many other poor fools got beaten in an alleyway for these small discs of copper? The money felt dirty. By the time I was done, I was half tempted to leave all the coins in an alley somewhere. But the second part of my afternoon involved introducing me to one of the rats' covert buyers. It was an older man who exchanged the goods for food and supplies, which the people of East Fiatra needed desperately. Once the trade was done, I was left with a dozen loaves of bread. It was nearing late afternoon now. Carcian strolled out of the building, which was closer to the East Fiatra Healers Guild than I was comfortable with. I was wearing a mask now, hoping against hope I wouldn't be spotted by anybody who might report back to Blood Joan. So I've got all this food, I said, storing a few of the loaves in my dimension ring. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough space for everything. But what are we going to do with it? Carcian seemed more somber now. Come on, Torrin. It's time you see the fruits of your labor. He leapt up onto the rooftops, beckoning me to follow. It wasn't easy running about with my hands full of bread, but I managed to make do. My senses were on high alert now, though. Blood Joan had sent out a kill order for me. I had been hiding my more distinguishing features like my hair and chain tattoo, so I shouldn't be easy to track down. But you never knew. I recognized the area we moved to as the suburb I had visited with Wade last night. Sure enough, Carcian skidded to a halt, beckoning me over. We were near Great G's apartment building. I'll be needing those loaves of bread now, he said. I obliged, handing him what I had in my arms. With a moment of concentration, I drew the rest from my dimension ring as well. A couple of clones of mist popped into existence next to Carcian, taking a few of the loaves with them. Then they bounded off the roof, zipping toward Great apartment. Looking between the clones and the leader of the rats, I still couldn't tell the difference between them. What are they doing? I asked. Delivering it to Greed, I'm guessing? Carcian nodded, the original crouching leisurely on the roof's edge. That they are. We need to be covert with our support, or else the Bloods will have an excuse to take it all away, he said with a suppressed sneer. The intensity with which he uttered those words vanished a moment later, dispersing like the mist he was so proud of. I wondered if I had imagined it. Greed exited her apartment, hauling a small wagon behind her. Inside it was an old cast iron pot, all the loaves of bread, and a bunch of other items I couldn't recognize. She pulled it with purpose, a measure to her step that I could feel even from a rooftop yards away. Her boots squelched in the muddy streets, but that didn't deter her in the slightest. Carcian and I trailed from the rooftop, watching her as she tugged her load along. After a short while, a few men and women began to fall in step behind her. A few of them showed the telltale signs of blood addiction, the constant use of the drug making their fingernails fall off and their skin develop splotches of greenish-yellow taint. Remembering the events of earlier today, I began to move. If those people wanted to rob Greed, they'd face my magic. I stood up, ready to jump down and intervene. Don't, Carcian interjected, causing me to hesitate. They aren't going to rob her. Look more closely. I looked down at the men and women following Greed. More and more joined as the seconds ticked on, and I realized after a while that they weren't following her to steal from her. They followed her in the same way a drum major led a marching band. After a while, Greed reached a large intersection. A canal ran along its edge, something that surprised me. While the rest of the city was interspersed and crisscrossed with waterways, East Fiatra was empty of them. The few I had seen were dried up, with no water rushing along. This singular conduit, however, carried water eastward. Greed began to unpack near the edge of the water. The people who had been following her moved in, helping her unload all that was in her wagon. A few other people joined them with pots in their hands soon. I could make out what they were doing. They're making a cook fire, I said with surprise. A few large cast iron pots were arrayed in a circle, all filled with water from the nearby canal. Men were setting small cuts of firewood beneath each one, working together to light fires. A woman directed some leaner men in miscellaneous tasks, clearly setting up some sort of gathering. It's more than that, Carcian said as a few of the fires finally lit. The people below began to mix ingredients from Great's cart into the pots, mixing and stirring to make some kind of stew. Chatter and noise grew from below, drawing many more to the growing fires. If there's anything you learned today, it should be this. There are many different kinds of theft. People lined up for the stew, laughing and conversing with those nearby in line. With my mana-enhanced senses, I could smell the brew from here. It was thick and hearty, clearly a meat stew of some sort. I found myself involuntarily salivating. Bowls of the broth were passed out to those in line along with a serving of bread. After the first wave was served, Greed picked up her lute. The men and women cheered her as she began to play, her normally reserved and fidgety nature dissolving under the confidence of her voice. The company of the rat takes wealth. We steal coins and jewelry, pulling them from under the noses of those who think themselves our betters, Carcian said, watching as some of the men began to dance to the tune. The sound of raucous laughter echoed into the air. But the Bloods of Fiatra, they take something from these people greater than we ever could. He gestured to the decrepit buildings all around us. They take their hope. The sun was setting now. The day was overcast and cloudy, and a light drizzle was in the air. Carcian stood, looking down at the dancing men. The obscuring mist that wrapped around him was invisible in the rain. So we steal their hope back for them, he said at last. I was practicing my telekinesis later that evening. A bowl of stew emptied nearby. The rain outside had picked up, and some of the water was drizzling through the cistern skylight. The water followed a clearly preordained path, draining away into the sewers. Nareni was talking with Carcian a ways away, focused on the planning map on the edge of the main room. Hoffel was polishing a tobacco pipe, periodically looking at it to make sure the shine reflected his face. I was trying to use 3 telekinetic pushes at once. It was surprisingly difficult. I needed to split my mind in a way that took extreme focus at the start. I was reminded of when I first started learning to drive a manual transmission, and how I needed to sync the movement of pressing in the clutch and shifting the gears. Your brain initially thought through each and every step, trying to forcefully rationalize what was better done by instinct. My range of telekinesis had also increased. When I started, I could only affect things within a 15-foot radius of myself. Now it was closer to 20 feet. The influence I could exert over objects that far out was barely worth noting, however. The force I could use was exponentially greater the closer it was to my body. I had 2 telekinetic pushes lightly pressing against the wall I was facing. They weren't enough to move me, only a pound or 2 of force each. But the trouble was adding another push. Whenever I tried to shift my focus to add another push, the other spells would waver from my lack of attention. I could feel the rune on my back offloading some of that attention, but there was still a minimum needed to maintain the effect. I ironed out my focus as the second push flickered from my drifting thoughts. A third flare of white light slowly brightened on another spot of the wall, the effort of my extreme focus causing me tunnel vision. Slowly but surely, it began to press against the wall as well. The first push started to waver this time, but I didn't relent. Eventually, the third push stabilized as I adapted to the sensation. I maintained the effect for half a minute, relishing in the success. Getting stronger every day, I thought, thinking about my core. I was close to breaking out of the light orange stage, something that delighted me to no end. I was interrupted by a bedraggled Wade dropping down the ladder. The man had taken the brunt of the rain outside, and the cloak he was wearing clearly didn't protect him enough. He shivered, wiping the fog away from his glasses. Do you need me to light a fire? I asked, noting how he failed to ward off the chill. The others here, Nareni, Hoffel, and Carcian all could strengthen their bodies with mana, the effect of some sort of rune. That helped keep the body warm. But Wade was a sentry, meaning he didn't have any runes that permitted body strengthening. You look like you jumped in the Sez, I said with a snort. That would be nice, Wade affirmed. I conjured a large fireball, then let it drift over to the sentry. It let off low heat, dancing around the young man in lazy loops. Hoffel finally put the pipe in his mouth, stuffing it with some tobacco. At least I thought it was tobacco. Could I get a fire, too? The axe wielder asked around the pipe. I rolled my eyes in good-natured annoyance, but sent over a tiny will-o-wisp to his pipe anyways. Whatever was inside began to burn quickly, eliciting a contented humph from the shield. Wade was looking at the burning pipe with an intrigued expression. Say, Torin? Yeah? What mage class are you, exactly? You've got a bunch of caster spells, but also a few striker spells, too. Which is it? I stilled, feeling the eyes of most of the room. Only Hoffel seemed to dismiss the question, content as he exhaled a ring of smoke. I don't know what I would be designated as, I said eventually. My first rune was telekinesis, which was a mark of a caster until I upgraded it to a crest through mastery. But everything else, I don't know where it would put me. Maybe a combination of striker and caster? None of what I said was untrue. I didn't think any mortal mage had successfully created a collage of magic types like I had, merging the Decathian and Alacrine methods so seamlessly. Funnily enough, I was sure my Mana Shroud would count as a shield spell here, too. Interesting, Wade said, shaking off his drenched cloak. I've only got a couple of runes, Nareni said sourly. I've got a crest that strengthens my body and reflexes, as well as a mark that lets me do this. She conjured a small ice cube into her hand, then tossed it toward Wade, who was focused away from her. In a perfect landing, it hit the back of his neck and slid down his shirt. The young sentry yelped, the frozen solid trailing down his back. Nareni chuckled as Wade cursed, but what Nareni said made me think. Wade said that most mages that grow up here that get runes just leave, I said. What made you stay? I asked the striker, curious. She stopped harassing Wade for a moment, who looked very, very bedraggled. She looked somewhat sheepish. Well, I might have left, but I was just really, really good at swiping things. I see something not tied down, not protected, and I just get this itch. They don't have jobs for that anywhere, so I didn't go. She shrugged. Besides, when Carcian gets down to teaching me some more, I'll be able to do some good. She was silent for a moment as she stared at the fire. And, one day, I want to get rid of the blight epidemic around here. I've seen good people die to that stuff. They just wither away into a shell of what they used to be. Like a block of ice melting, leaving nothing left. Never got hooked myself because of that. The young woman was silent. I watched it take my pops. He wasn't a good man, but he was better than most around here. Only hit me sometimes, and only when I was bad. The room was quiet for a long time. Each person seemed to be thinking about what Nareni had just said, coming to their own terms with it. You know, Hoffel said, setting down his pipe, when I was young, I watched a temple to the Vritra doctrination being built in the outskirts of Ytril. Mages called up stone in little blocks, then sent each one off to nearby strikers with enhanced strength, who'd cart the stone to who knows where. Then they'd slowly pile each brick up, making the temple bit by bit. The man tapped his wood pipe against the ground. Me, being a good-for-nothing whippersnapper who didn't yet know the wonders of cherry tobacco. I watched it from afar, peering down from my mother's tall apartment. It was all stupid, I thought. Why make a whole bunch of tiny blocks if one of the sides could just swoop over and make it all at once? Those people ran about like ants with their work. It all felt very contrived. The man had a strange look in his eye as he reminisced. But as the weeks wore on, the building grew taller and taller. It soared above my home, reaching the sky, and then they added the paint, and the arches, and the domes. The people worked and worked, everybody pitching in to make their worship a reality. And when the steeple was finally set atop the top, my good-for-nothing whippersnapper self had never seen anything more marvelous. Nareni was looking at the older shield with something complicated in her eyes. The point I hope I've gotten across, girl, is that everything important starts with little blocks. They look small, like swiping a trinket off a man's belt or stealing into his man's, but eventually, they come together in a beautiful structure. You just need time, the shield finished. I opened my mouth but closed it again after a moment. Hoffel's story felt strange to me. Could I build up to my grand structure? Was it really possible to lay small bricks over time, slowly reaching for the heavens? Did I have the time to lay my foundations, set my pace? After a little while, the silence was broken by Wade. I'm afraid I have to pull you all from your talk. I came down because I got some information recently. Tonight is going to be the best night for our next heist. Chapter 31, The First Heist. Published by Web Novel. Discordant note, TBATE. Torin Dane was weak, crushed under the oppressive boot of the Vritra's strength-based society. But after the desperate last gamble of a failing deity imbues him with more knowledge than he ever dreamed of, he is forced to enter a proxy war between the Surin clans that has lasted for untold generations. Armed with knowledge of the future and the potential to change it, Torin will have to face high bloods, corrupt churches, dangerous beasts, and power-hungry Asura to get what he needs. If he wishes to survive, he will have to alter the future in a way that will keep him and those he cares for safe from the approaching tide of war and death, all while hiding a burning secret in his core from the very leaders of the continent he lives on. For Alakria, and by extension, Torin himself is a mere piece in a larger game between the gods. And when deities play chess with the lives of mortals as pawns, only bloodshed follows. Semi-SI into Alakria. Updates daily. Cover art commissioned by @_Afra_. Nareni. The rats grouped together as Carcian called a meeting, each of us taking a position around the old map of Fiatra. Wade gave Carcian a brief overview of whatever he'd found, leaving the finer details to our leader. Carcian narrowed his eyes behind his mask, observing the spot on the map. I'd only seen his face beneath the mask once. For those who are unaware, Carcian said, clearly indicating Torin, we've been scouting out a supply warehouse for a while now. It's owned by a lesser-known blood called the Ilasons. Our leader retrieved a stack of paper from the table, holding it up. They have an unfortunate habit of withholding pay from their unadorned employees. Unfortunately for them, that little tendency is going to cost them far more than they ever saved from their pay cuts. Carson's grin was savage. I ruminated a bit over Hoffel's words from a few minutes earlier. The man had a way with his stories and comforts, but I didn't want to wait. I didn't have the time to set my little blocks. Each day Blythe continued to poison the lives of everybody I knew. Carcian started going over the plan for the infiltration, drawing me from my introspection. It was standard procedure and something I had reviewed a dozen times before. Instead of tuning into our leader, I covertly measured our new member. Torin was a good mage, but he'd make for a poor thief. He didn't even look over the people he was with, checking the value of their goods. Being a good thief wasn't just about how fast and quiet you were like Cars told him. It was about seeing what was valuable. Part of me was thankful for the help he'd given us a week ago. While Hoffel and I would have gotten out of our predicament just fine because of our trump card, his assistance ensured it. The other part of me wondered why Carcian had invited the boy in so easily. He got a stellar recommendation from Anti-Greed, true, but that didn't mean we let him into the cistern on the same day he joined. Carcian rarely trusted me like he ought to. I was second in command, according to him, but he hadn't even briefed me on Torin's admittance into our band. That might have been why I went so hard on him in our spar. I settled myself. I shouldn't question Carcian. My mentor knew best about these kinds of things. And so Torin will be joining you on your mission, Carcian finished saying, startling me to attention. What was that? I asked, unsure. Torin will be joining you and Hoffel as an additional backup, Carcian repeated. The Bloods are on high alert for us already, as evidenced by their attempt to capture you a week ago. Another fighting mage will be reassuring. I shoved down a vehement refusal. It had taken a month to get Carcian to let me on a job, and only after I had proven myself. I had earned that trust. But he's only just joined, I said instead, trying to work from a logical angle. Wouldn't it make sense for Torin to get some more practice in first before attempting this? He won't be there to help you steal, Carcian elaborated, but to protect. You're right that he doesn't have enough experience with stealing to make a difference. And I can muffle your steps, Torin said from the side. I might not be that great at picking locks, but if you'll never make a note with me nearby. He raised a foot, then brought it down hard on the bricks. The impact made no sound. Another rune? I thought, incredulous. How many did he have? I'd seen Torin use a fireball, telekinesis, coat his arms in fire, some sort of sound explosion, body strengthening, a shield over his arms, and now this. It was astounding. Hoffel patted me on the shoulder, seeming to understand my unease. The man silently puffed a ring of smoke, content to follow along. I wished I could be as confident as he was. Fine, I said, trying and failing to restrain a bit of irritation. But you'll follow my orders while we're out, all right? I said, leveling the young mage with a stare. He looked disconcerted by my response but nodded anyway. A map of the warehouse and surrounding area was laid out on the table, with several key points of interest highlighted. There were several points marked where infiltration would be possible, with clear routes to the main office of the warehouse. Wade's rats had scouted the place thoroughly, leaving us with a clear picture of our objective. Apparently, one of the warehouse's more competent mages was currently off work sick, something Wade had learned before coming here for the night. I smiled at our sentry as Carcian went over what he'd uncovered. He returned the smile hesitantly, then quickly returned his attention to the map. Too quickly. One day, I'll make you keep that smile trained on me, I thought, a bit smug that I could make him so nervous, but also a bit annoyed. I returned my attention to the plan. It was simple. Get in, grab the goods, get out. We had a reliable schedule for guard patrols as well. If we were careful, we would never be spotted. I tapped my finger against my arm. It was never that simple. Torin, Hoffel, and I moved through the sewers, taking predetermined twists and turns toward an eventual maintenance access hole. I took the lead, sure in my steps. We each wore our rat masks. I could hear Torin taking measured breaths through his nose behind me. The stench of the sewers was a chore to adapt to, but he was managing. I spotted a musk crab scuttling on some debris in the water. Its eyes, which were raised on stalks, were barely visible in the dark. The little creature scuttled past us, getting a bit too close to Torin. The paranoid man speared it with his dagger before it could get any closer. It writhed on the blade, 8 shelled limbs struggling weakly on the edge of his steel. You didn't need to kill it, I said sourly. I like those little crustaceans. They made the sewers more lively, added some spice to the monotony. Anything with more than 4 legs doesn't deserve to exist, Torin said darkly. It's part of my religion. Don't you worship the Vritra? I asked. I don't think the doctrination has any doctrines against crustaceans. I said it as a joke, but I hadn't gone to a temple since I was really, really young. For all I knew, the Vritra could have a doctrine against crabs. Were there crab asura in a fetus? The body of the musk crab, which had eventually gone still, vanished with a flash of light. Torin had clearly stored it in his dimension ring. Basilisks don't have legs in their asuran form, the young mage replied. I think they should be offended by something having 8. If they don't, Hoffel piped in, you could try and become a vicar and petition our sovereigns to add some laws against crabs, he said with a good-natured laugh. You already have an old vicar's mask. You look the part. I do, Torin said, sounding confused. You mean the iron mask I wore before this one? I thought it was just an old antique. It's not a simple antique, Hoffel replied. The design is not as well known as it should be. Those iron masks were popular amongst the clergy before High Vicar Varadoth standardized the vicar's garb. I listened in, curious. The vicars were the priests who preached for the Vritra doctrination. Most had Vritra ancestry, but I was fuzzy on the details. I hadn't attended a worship service in over a decade and a half, which made me offer a silent prayer of apology to the sovereigns. I hoped that was enough. Hoffel naturally knew more about this, considering his background. Torin muttered something I couldn't hear. Are you a dedicated faithful? He asked, nodding to Hoffel. You seem to know a good bit about the doctrination. More than I do, it seems. In the long gone days of my youth, I was more pious, he replied. I worship the Vritra as much as any man should, though. They saved us from our mortal squalor, after all, granting us magic and all that. But I can't make it to a temple every week. The conversation dropped off after that, but Torin didn't seem content to let the quiet rest. So, Nareni, he started. What exactly does it mean that you're the young rat? He asked, clearly curious. If Carcian is the rat, does that make you his student, or something? Or something. Carcian was supposed to be teaching me, but that had stalled in the past few months, much to my chagrin. With too many duties and work getting in the way, my mentor kept me in the dark. That, and I'm the official second in command for the rats as a whole, I replied. If you've got a problem and Carcian isn't there, I'm your go-to. I felt a slight smirk creep across my features, banishing the bit of irritation that I felt remembering my delayed training. I get to tell you what to do, Torin. He snorted. Don't think you can make me lick your boots, young rat, he shot back chidingly. Oh, I wasn't thinking that, I said slyly, turning over my shoulder to look Torin in the eye. Maybe I'll just make you clean the cistern's bathroom for the next month. I expected more of a reaction, but Torin actually seemed to be thinking it over. Before he could respond, we reached our destination, an old service ladder that was rusting and worn, creeping down the side of the sewer walls like a descending vine. We're here, I said, alerting the two behind me. I hopped up the ladder, stealthily opening the manhole far above. Peering each way down the street, I gave the all clear. We piled out of the sewer quickly and quietly, then ducked into a nearby alleyway. Hoffel summoned a familiar artifact from his dimension rune, using it to freeze the sticking sewage on his boots. It rotated around our group before being handed back to the shield. Finally ready for action, I rolled my neck. We were in South Fiatra now, not far from the main mouth of the Sez. The warehouse we were aiming for sat along the shoreline of the mighty river, Fiakra's gateway to the wider continent. All right, here's the plan, I whispered, the looming boxy warehouse behind me. Torin and I will go in the top window, keeping to the scaffolding for stealth. Hoffel, you'll enter from below, keeping an exit clear for us. You'll be our cover for any unexpected incidents at our backs. We'd gone over this at the hideout already, but it never hurt to repeat the plan. I could only hope that Torin would be able to match our stealth. I gestured to Torin, who followed after me. I increased my speed as I gracefully approached the warehouse, using one of my marks to suffuse my muscles with mana. I leapt a good 10 feet in the air, conjuring small picks of ice in my hands. Before I could impact the wall, I rammed one of the small icicles into the bricks, feeling it lodge there. Then I jumped another 10 feet, catching the lip of one of the windows. Hoffel darted to a side entrance of the warehouse, covertly messing with the lock. He'd have it open soon. I peered inside the window. The warehouse was dark inside, but flickering lantern light and low mana-powered artifacts spread a consistent luminescence across the large area. I could spot a dozen crates inside, but I didn't have any sort of spell form to enhance my vision further. I thought there might have been some sort of sigil painted on the crates, but I couldn't tell. A bit of white mana flared on the edge of the window. Torin soared up to my side, having used his telekinesis to anchor himself to the wall as he jumped. There isn't anyone patrolling over the scaffolding, I whispered to the newest rat, peering back through the misty pane of glass. We're going to get in now. Torin spared a glance through the glass himself, his attention zeroing onto the warehouse floor. Those boxes have the crest of Bloodjone painted on them, he said, his eyes narrowing behind his mask. He could see that well, I thought. Vision enhancement, then, another spell form, or a different application of one he already showed. Don't let yourself get sidetracked, I chided, knowing the bone the young man had to pick with the family. I could respect that vengeance, but I wouldn't allow him to compromise our mission for it. We're here for one thing, and those crates are not part of our heist. Torin shook his head, seemingly banishing those thoughts. Of course, he said, though I wasn't sure if he had truly removed them from his mind. I'll follow your lead, he reiterated. I conjured another ice dagger, but this time focused intently on the edge as it formed. I focused my desire through my crest, willing the blade to be sharp. Sharper than anything else. The knife settled into my hand, the way it fit into my palm a familiar reassurance. Without wasting a second, I began to pull the edge along the panes of the wind, tracing a wide, circular outline. This blade I had formed was extremely brittle, so I had to work cautiously. Torin kept an eye on our surroundings, making sure we weren't surprised as I continued my work. Soon enough, I had carved an oval through the glass. With a hesitant push, a thin section of glass popped out, almost falling to the ground below. I caught it before that could happen, gently setting it aside. After making sure the coast was clear once more, I slipped through the thin opening into the warehouse. Torin followed after, but with noticeably more difficulty. He wasn't as lithe as I was, after all. A network of metal walkways hung over the warehouse, allowing men and women to traverse and observe the goings-on below. They also provided amazing vantage points and opportunities for stealth, which I exploited mercilessly. Torin and I followed the predetermined path Wade had outlined for us, avoiding several snoozing guards along the way. The rats had swiped some of Blood Ilison's gold once before, and the security was just as lax the last time, too. I chuckled to myself inwardly as I glided past a guard once he passed our intersection. Torin suddenly laid a hand on my shoulder, gesturing behind us. My eyes widened as I saw what he was gesturing to. A few men were trailing along the walkway from where we had come. They hadn't noticed us yet, but it would only take a glance. Thinking fast, I dropped over the side of the walkway. Conjuring a tool of ice in my hands, I used a construct with a hook-shaped end to latch onto the underside of the scaffolding. I pulled my legs up, planting them on the underside of the metal. My heart beat in my chest as Torin scrambled off the side as well, his hands glowing with telekinetic power. The mage suctioned his hands to the bottom of the walkway. He hung next to me, feet dangling and strangely managing to keep himself anchored to the bottom of the platform by just his palms. The act clearly strained his magic if his slight frown of concentration gave anything away. The footsteps of the guards echoed closer, thumping in time with my heartbeat. They finally reached our hiding place, the echo of boots on metal continuing on overhead. Think Blood Ilison will actually ship this? A guard said in a low tone, but audible from where we were. His clothes weren't that expensive, but I spied a flash from a bangle around his wrist that was probably worth a pretty penny. The other guards halted in place, clearly ready to start up a conversation about this. They stopped right over the top of us. Don't be foolish, Kem. It'll make them money. No way they don't sell the goods. I looked up through the grate like mesh of the walkway, watching the guards with a rising sense of terror. One of their boots was just to the side of my face. I could see one of the men hadn't shaved in days if the light patchy stubble on his chin was anything to go by. He had a nice button coat, probably bought in West Fiatra. He wasn't looking down. Maybe, but with all that the Jones have gone through, it'd be foolish to keep doing business with them. The Ilasons should back out already, he said. And what do you know of blood politics? Another scoffed. You're a third son of an unknown blood. I know enough about the world, the one called Chem spat back, clearly antagonized by the former. Besides, it isn't good for reputation, selling what the eye-license sell. Once Blood Joan crashes, their business will be dug up, and the eye-license will lose a lot of face from having worked along. I met Torrens' eyes as he dangled from his palms. A bead of sweat was running down his cheek where the mask ended, and I knew from the light in his eyes that he couldn't maintain his hang for much longer. He'd swing up there and beat those men senseless if he had to. He's not a thief, I remembered. He's a warrior. My heart pounded as the men continued to bicker, but a second later they began to walk away. Their little argument receded with their footsteps. I waited another few seconds, making sure the men were out of sight, then swung back over the railing. Torren joined me a second later, shaking out his arms. I didn't know how he was feeling, but my arms burned where I held the ice hooks. Come on, I mouthed, nodding toward a door nearby. That was our target. The walkways converged on this small room that jutted over the warehouse, providing the overseers a good view from above of all their minions' work. We scuttled toward the door, nervous about any more patrols. I knelt down before the door, coalescing two small utensils of ice. I began to quickly pick the lock, fiddling with the tumblers inside. There, the final pin latched into place, and the door clicked open. I turned the doorknob, opening the door silently. I was almost immediately greeted with a club to the head. Torren stepped in, grabbing at a wooden bat as it nearly clipped my skull. I jumped back in alarm, but Torren surged inward instead. The door swung open fully, revealing a short guard who had tried to beat my head into the ground. Torren easily disarmed the man, then delivered a solid punch to his stomach. The man keeled over, scrambling away from the mage. He opened his mouth to scream. No, I thought, worry rising in my chest as I dashed forward. We couldn't let him make a sound. If anybody was alerted that we were here, the operation would be over before it even began. The man tried to scream. He tried. His chest moved as if he should be exhaling air, and no doubt sound, but nothing came out. That made him even more terrified, his eyes darting about. I grabbed the man before he could scramble away, maneuvering him into a chokehold. My forearm pressed against his neck, cutting off the blood flow to his brain. The man struggled for a few moments, but stood no chance against my body when it was strengthened with mana. He slumped shortly afterward, unconscious. I let him drop to the ground quietly. I peered over at Torren, who was lowering his hand. The man had cut off the sounds this guard would have been making, saving the operation. Thank you, I whispered, confident it was safe to speak now that the guard was down. No problem, Torren said back, pulling the door behind us closed. It locked again with a click. I didn't think there would be anyone in here, he said, referencing the guard slumped on the floor. I withdrew a bit of rope from my dimension rune, using it to bind his hands and stuff his mouth. Even if he woke up sometime soon, he wouldn't be going anywhere. It makes sense, I replied. The mage that usually guards this room is sick today, but that doesn't mean there would be no guard at all. He's probably a last-minute replacement. Once I was done securing the guard, I stood up, looking over the room. It was decorated rather lavishly for what I guessed was a warehouse supervisor's headquarters. Spread out over a large table were several papers, but the real prize was behind a small door in the corner. The safe was sculpted from the structural supports with metal magic, something that was common to prevent theft. Safes like these seemed to grow out of the building itself. This was intentional. A thief could pull anything they wanted into their dimension ring if it was large enough, but if their target was literally a part of the building, it would be exceedingly difficult to store the box. The more advanced safe box designs actively disrupted a dimension ring's use instead, meaning it was impossible to pull into the small storage. Those were more difficult to crack and far more expensive. Luckily, I only had to deal with the budget version. The lock for the safe was keyed to a certain mana signature instead of a more common tumbler system. I withdrew a special tool from my dimension ring. It looked like a dull sphere with grooves along the side, but it was in fact a tuning artifact. Holding it up to the locking mechanism of the safe, I synchronized the two with my mana. Now came the tricky part. Mana locks that needed unique mana signatures acted a lot like normal pin locks, anyway. A certain roughness in a person's mana signature would perfectly fit a predetermined groove. The sharp essence of a mage's affinity might allow another piece to slide into place. A dozen of these interlocking pieces worked together to recognize a mage's mana signature, at least roughly. I worked through the metaphysical lock, probing with my mana to nudge certain parts either which way. Time slipped away as I maneuvered around each puzzle piece, each part that bound into place sending a thrill through me. And finally, I cracked the code. It took 5 minutes before I finally unlocked the thing, which was painfully long. The door of the safe swung open, revealing a small stack of jewels and papers. I pulled both into my dimension ring, then swung the safe shut once more. Mission accomplished. I stood, stretching out the aches in my back from standing still for so long. We've got the goods, I said, turning around. Let's get out of here. But Torren didn't seem to hear me, but he was leaning over the papers that were spread on the large table, anger present in his features. His teeth were clenched, a muscle visibly rippling along his sharp jawline. He tapped a finger as he scoured over the papers, the contents clearly souring his mood. He looked up as I approached warily. Nareni, he whispered, you'll want to read this. Chapter 32, Blood Money. Published by Web Novel. Discordant note, TBATE. Torren Dane was weak, crushed under the oppressive boot of the Vreetra's strength-based society. But after the desperate last gamble of a failing deity imbues him with more knowledge than he ever dreamed of, he is forced to enter a proxy war between the Surin clans that has lasted for untold generations. Armed with knowledge of the future and the potential to change it, Torren will have to face high bloods, corrupt churches, dangerous beasts, and power-hungry Asura to get what he needs. If he wishes to survive, he will have to alter the future in a way that will keep him and those he cares for safe from the approaching tide of war and death, all while hiding a burning secret in his core from the very leaders of the continent he lives on. For Alakria, and by extension, Torren himself is a mere piece in a larger game between the gods. And when deities play chess with the lives of mortals as pawns, only bloodshed follows. Semi-SI into Alakria. Updates daily. Cover art commissioned by @_Afra_. Nareni. I cautiously edged over to the papers on the large table, which were laid out in a jumble. I picked up a random page, scanning over the contents. Delivery delayed due to unforeseen interference during retrieval, big bold letters claimed. More details were scrawled out in dark ink below. I opted to scan over the parchment, knowing we were short on time already. Acquisition of acid beam paper delayed. Expect setbacks in the distillation of new product for you to sell. On it was a seal depicting an ember laid at the fork of a river, that of Blood Joan. I grabbed another paper. It had a similar message to the first regarding the distribution of product, and the eye-license duty to sell whatever Blood Joan created. The details were annoyingly hazy, with clever wording to shroud deeper understanding. Do you know what they're talking about? Torren said, clearly invested. Considering some of these papers mentioned the effects he had caused in the Clearwood Forest, it made sense. I mean, what does Blood Joan want the eye-license to distribute? What are they selling? I frowned, wondering the same. I don't know, I said. Clearly something that uses the acid beam paper, but the uses for that are innumerable. Probably something magical? I pointed to the paper I was holding in my hand. This one uses the word distill, which means it's got to be a potion of some kind. Truth be told, I didn't know much about Blood Joan's operations. I only knew about the Clearwood Forest expedition because it was so out of character for the blood to do it themselves. Theatra maintained a steady harvest of acid beam paper because of its value, but the Jones going out of their way for an entire nest instead of an intermediary was unprecedented. Wade usually managed the information side of our operations, so he would know better. These papers never explicitly stated what kind of product was being distributed by the eye-license on behalf of the Jones. They were being deliberately vague, as was the rest of the wording on the other sheets of paper here. Why? I wondered, the gears in my brain spinning. I felt on the cusp of some realization, something that would cause all the pieces to fall into place. I felt a bit of dread in my chest. Whatever conclusion I was inching toward was a horrible one. And then I found the last puzzle piece. Another paper had a name that stood out to me, one that caused my hand to subconsciously grab it. It was a contract for a man named Run. He was to circulate product throughout East Theatra at a specific rate, then give the majority of his profits to the eye-license. The eye-license would deliver product to him every couple of weeks to sell. The pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicked into place, just like when I managed to bind every pin in a lock. The door to knowledge swung open, and I shrank in on myself. I felt cold, as if a bucket of ice had been dumped on my head. Distillery, product, East Fiatra. Probably a potion of some kind, I had said. Oh, no, I said shakily, knowing exactly what I was looking at. Torrin's head snapped up to look at me, clearly hearing the realization in my voice. I drew Laren's contract into my dimension ring. What is it? Torrin asked, suddenly worried. It seemed he was catching my mood. What did you find out, Nareni? Are you okay? I shook my head. We need to leave now, I said, brushing away his concerns. He looked unsure but complied as I headed out the door. The walkway was empty of people, but with the growing anger in my gut, I doubted I'd be able to maintain stealth anyway. Escaping the building was easier than getting in the first place. Thankfully, Torrin and I only had to evade one guard patrol as we walked, and they didn't stop to chat as they moseyed on by. I was glad for that. Once we were out, I dropped by Hoffel. He was observing the main entrances to the building from a nearby rooftop, providing cover for us in case someone unexpected came from the outside. Usually, I didn't have a sentry to watch my exit. Torrin took Hoffel's usual place as my second because Carcian wanted him to get some experience, but that left Hoffel out of his normal job. So I dropped him here to watch our backs. Hoffel, I said sternly, come on, we've got to go. Torrin trailed right behind me, looking between Hoffel and me. Did you get what we came for? Hoffel asked, worried by my strange demeanor. No hiccups? Their safe is emptied, Hoffel. Don't worry about that, I bit out. How did I react to what I had just discovered? What did I do? So, are you going to tell me what you figured out? Torrin hedged as we moved toward the alley where the sewer access point was. I ground my teeth. You read the papers we found, Torrin, I said back. Blood Joan is making some sort of product with acid beam paper, then strong-arming the eye-lasons into selling it around. Torrin nodded. Yeah, I got that much. But they weren't exactly clear on what they're selling, he said. Whatever it is, I'm guessing it's stored in those crates in the warehouse. They had the Jones crest on them, after all. The reason they weren't clear was that if it became widespread what Blood Joan is making, they would have hell to pay from the supervisory, I said. They're making Blythe, quote. Hoffel stopped in place, shocked. Torrin's face went pale. The drug? He asked again, as if what I said needed clarification. I had been crystal clear. Yes, I replied harshly. The same drug that's devastated East Fiatra for the past half a century. Blood Joan is the one making it. Torrin turned back to the warehouse, a strange look on his face. He didn't look angry. A strange mask of determination settled over his features. I realized it then. He wanted to march right back to that building and burn it to the ground. He is not a thief, I remembered again. He is a warrior. I was half tempted to let him act. Torrin's mana actually flared with palpable anger. Then something changed in his face. He seemed to deflate, and a second later Hoffel laid a hand on his arm. Come on, son. If you want to burn that place to the ground, you'll need to plan a bit beforehand. Too many bystanders, the big shield said. Torrin reluctantly let himself be pulled to the sewer drain. Hoffel dropped down into the muck after me. How do you know it's Blythe they're making? Hoffel asked as we trudged along, the dour mood weighing on us like a blanket. They had a contract for a man called Larun, I said. According to the paper, Blood Ellison would give him the product, and he'd sell it to customers at an agreed price. Every 2 weeks, he'd give the profit to Blood Ellison. I shook my head. I know Larun, spindly, conniving little man from the outskirts of Sesklar, and he deals Blythe to addicts who will never stop taking. I didn't know what to do with what I just learned, but I knew who would. Carcian always knew the next step to take. I could trust him with this. The cistern never felt more welcoming to me as I stepped through the sliding facade brick wall. I barely waited for Hoffel's freezing artifact to clean off my shoes before I bolted through the area, looking for Carcian. I found him quickly. He was at our map with Wade, peering over some documents. I didn't know what they were for, but that didn't matter right now. Carcian, I need your help, I said, ignoring the startled look from Wade. Nareni, you're back quicker than expected, he said, neatly ignoring my request. Were you successful in your heist? Managed to outwit all your foes? Yes, I was, I said quickly, trying to organize my thoughts. Look, what we've been doing doesn't matter. I've discovered something really, really big. The Jones, they're working with the eye-lasons, and some other people, I think. Wade stood, rubbing his sleep-deprived eyes. Nareni, wait, you're speaking too fast. Slow down, please. Hoffel and Torrin caught up to me as I tried to shuffle my thoughts into reasonable order. Blood Jones been using the eye-lasons to distribute Blythe through East Fiatra, and I'm guessing several other families, too. And if we can figure out how they're doing so, we can cut the problems of addiction in this district off at the root. I said with growing enthusiasm, pointing at the location of Blood Jones' estate on the map of Fiatra. When I first found out the eye-lasons were distributing the Blythe to East Fiatra, I was livid. But as I walked through the sewers, I realized something important. If we knew the source of the infection, we could cut off the flow at the source. My goal of finally ridding East Fiatra of the scourge of Blythe could be real. And just like Hoffel had said, this was the first block in my grand temple. I was expecting Carcian to share my enthusiasm. He would congratulate me for my find, and tell me that it was a worthy lead to follow. We would make real progress in fixing East Fiatra. Instead, he just nodded. That's good, he said in his normal tone. What did you find out specifically? Did you wrangle it from some unsuspecting noble? I slowly lowered my arm, sensing something was off. I knew Carcian well enough now. If this was something new to him, there'd be a self-satisfied glimmer in his eye. Or maybe a little more tension than normal in his stance as he processed the information. Did he? I looked at Wade sharply, narrowing my eyes. He willed it under my gaze, looking at the floor instead of me. You already knew, I said, the implications boiling inside of me. You both knew about this and didn't tell me. Wade winced at my raised voice. Carcian spoke up instead, the witty sarcasm in his voice replaced by an irritating nonchalance. I've been following leads toward the production of Blythe for a while now, he said. Wade has helped me map out information and track down leads on this under my orders. I stepped back, a feeling of betrayal rising in my stomach. How long? I said, looking at Wade. How long did you know? He closed his eyes. A few months, he said. I wanted to tell you, Nareni. I didn't want to keep this a secret from you, I promise. But Carcian told me to keep it quiet. My mouth went dry. A few months. 3 months ago, the method of my missions changed per Carson's order. Our targets became more specific, and the procedure more careful. Now the contents of a specific strongbox. Take the papers from this filing cabinet. Before we had been more random and indiscriminate in our thefts. When I asked Carcian why, he had just told me that he was perfecting the art of the steal. Taking things that wouldn't be missed, or grabbing items and information that could be sold at a profit. The deception burned in my chest. Why didn't you tell me? I asked Carcian, trying to keep the emotion from my voice. I was supposed to be his second in command, to take up his mantle one day. And he didn't tell me about operations he'd been doing for months? About something so close to my purpose? You didn't need to know yet, Carcian replied bluntly. If you knew any earlier, it could have changed our plans or compromised my ability to keep things under control. You're impatient. Then why Wade? I asked sharply, gesturing to the young man. He was still staring at the floor. How did he not compromise your ability to keep things under control? His network was invaluable to me, Carcian countered matter-of-factly. I wouldn't have been able to do half the things I needed to without him. And my help wasn't invaluable? I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. That seemed to get through Carson's skin. He hesitated, thinking over his words, clearly deciding what the best response was. To try and make up some sort of flamboyant way to dismiss my concerns. In the mess of my thoughts, another thing finally made sense. It only served to stoke the flames of my anger higher. Of course Blood Jones saw us coming, I muttered, my eyes widening in realization. A week ago, our heist against the Jones had gone awry because they had been expecting Hoffel and me to infiltrate. I had assumed our band had a mole in it, feeding information to the Jones. I had brought up my concerns with Carcian, while also trying to make covert investigations myself. We made a pattern, striking at points related to their operations. Of course, they expected us to hit them eventually. I didn't wait for Carcian to reply, too angry at the twofold betrayal. I turned on my heel, stalking toward my rooms. I heard Hoffel say something to Carcian before I was out of earshot. I spent half an hour twirling ice daggers through my hands as I lay on my bed, thinking of a dozen different things at once. Normally, working the ice through my hands helped me focus. It centered me, allowing me to think clearly. But my thoughts were a jumble now, and I had a hard time trying to clamp down on any specific idea. A knock sounded on the door to my room. Nereni? Hoffel said from outside the door. May I come in? I stopped moving my daggers, holding them still above me. They were nearly entirely clear, but a crystalline blemish here and there created small reflections where I could see my short black hair. Come in, I said at last. Hoffel came in slowly, closing the door behind him. The cistern only had natural light in the central chamber, so all the illumination in the other rooms came from lighting artifacts. They cast Hoffel's face in a strange glow. I came to check on you, he said slowly, his gruff voice at odds with the words. I wanted to see how you were doing. Are you going to tell me another story about how old this sewer system is? I said scathingly, maybe tell me it's not so bad because these rocks have lasted 200 years and that I can, too, if I just hold on a little longer. Hoffel paused, and I recognized the emotion that flashed over his face. It was gone in an instant, but what I'd said had hurt him. I'm sorry, Hoff. I shouldn't have said that. Hoffel was quiet for a moment. Perhaps I tell too many stories about the stones around us, he said somberly. And if it makes you feel any better, I was going to say something similar. I might have snickered at that if I was in a better mood. I banished the daggers into the atmosphere, feeling the spell unravel once I released control. Why won't he trust me? I asked, a question that had been burning in the back of my mind for a long time now. He called me his protege, the young rat. I was supposed to be learning more, taking on more and more responsibility. He does trust you, Nereni, Hoffel responded. Otherwise, he wouldn't believe you capable of leading me and now Torin on our heists. I snorted. That's not the trust I mean, Hoff. He trusts me like a boss does his employee, not a master their student. I stared at the ceiling. What will it take, Hoff, for him to actually teach me? Hoffel talked about bricks making grand temples. I didn't want to be another brick. I wanted to be an architect. Hoffel was quiet for a very long time. Cars doesn't like to trust, he said at last. I've known him a long time. Nearly a decade now, you know. Do you know where I met him? On an ascent, I replied, having heard this story before. What was the point of this tale now? You partnered up in the relic tombs, then worked together on and off for years after. Hoffel sat down in a chair near my desk. Ah, the relic tombs. The ancient mages had a truly grand sense of design. If you look at their structures, you can usually see an overlying methodology too. The shield paused, catching himself as he saw the look in my eye. I have gotten off topic. Yes, you know the story, after all. I got a young Carcian through his first few ascents, helping him win a few accolades. You know some of our stories, but not the most important one. Hoffel paused. But I don't know the most important story, either. I peered at the shield from my bed, confused. Carcian used to be a lot more trusting, Nereni. It was one of the things that drew people to him. It wasn't a foolhardy trust, mind you, but he took you at your word unless you proved otherwise. Even despite his unblooded status, he was popular. People felt compelled to be honest around him. Hoffel pawed at his jacket, an unconscious habit he did whenever he looked for a cigar. The man caught himself, though, and forcefully returned his arm to his lap. He was an awful lot like young Torin in that regard, I suppose. But something changed on his last ascent a little over a year ago. Somebody did something to him that wounded him deeply. I blinked. I hadn't heard this before. What happened? I asked, curious. I don't know, Hoffel shrugged. And he won't tell me. He refuses to, no matter how much I've pried. He's locked up tighter than the bowels of Tigran Kylum now. But whatever happened out there is what drew him back to his hometown of Fiatra. I don't see how this makes things easier for me, I said with a sigh. Though the story was interesting, it felt irrelevant to me right now. It probably doesn't, Hoffel concurred. But I wouldn't have followed Carcian long if I didn't believe the man he used to be wasn't still in there somewhere. It might be buried deep, but I know you can get to him. He paused. You have been already. Hoffel let me ponder his words after he left, the questions bouncing around in my head. Twirling my daggers did nothing to simmer the chaos in my head. Chapter 33, Reasons. Published by Web Novel. Discordant note, TBATE. Torin Dane was weak, crushed under the oppressive boot of the Vritra's strength-based society. But after the desperate last gamble of a failing deity imbues him with more knowledge than he ever dreamed of, he is forced to enter a proxy war between the Surin clans that has lasted for untold generations. Armed with knowledge of the future and the potential to change it, Torin will have to face high bloods, corrupt churches, dangerous beasts, and power-hungry Asura to get what he needs. If he wishes to survive, he will have to alter the future in a way that will keep him and those he cares for safe from the approaching tide of war and death, all while hiding a burning secret in his core from the very leaders of the continent he lives on. For Alakria, and by extension, Torin himself is a mere piece in a larger game between the gods. And when deities play chess with the lives of mortals as pawns, only bloodshed follows. Semi-SI into Alakria. Updates daily. Cover art commissioned by @_Afra_. Torin Dane. I watched Nereni go, a complicated mix of feelings settling in me. From what I could gather,